The ancient world was absolutely full of mysteries. I'm talking thousands of years worth of basically unexplainable stuff. When we think of these mysteries, we tend to think of stuff like Atlantis and the Great Pyramids and other stuff like that. And while those are great, this iceberg contains 100 entries of things that are even more mysterious than those. We've got vanishing civilizations, seemingly alien artifacts, mysterious gaps in time that nobody can actually explain, and a lot more. So join me right now as we start the Ancient Mysteries of the World Iceberg Volume 2. As always, Iceberg credits to u/oldthrace on Reddit. I couldn't have done this without you. The very first entry on this iceberg is the collection of artifacts known as crystal skulls. These are skulls carved out of quartz crystals and thought to have originated in like Native American cultures or maybe even like Aztec or Mayan civilizations. The truth about these skulls is that they were actually probably made in a lab in the 1800s, so they're not really some ancient mystery. They were just crafted 200 years ago. Close examination of these crystal skulls shows that they were probably made in a semi-modern jeweler's lab, and it just so happens that there's a spot in Germany that is very famous for making intricate crystal designs similar to these skulls. Pair this with the fact that none of these crystal skulls have actually been found on an official archaeological dig site, and I'll let you come to your own conclusion about that. They are still very popular in pseudo-archaeological circles though. There's even that Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls movie, so that tells you that much at least. Here's where it gets a little crazy though, just a little bit. There's this guy named Joshua Shapiro who is a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator that's obsessed with these skulls. He claims that each skull is a sort of computer that can record the energy and vibrations from the world around it. He claims that these skulls themselves can heal people as well as enhance the psychic abilities of those around it. It makes no sense. It's just what? You can believe that if you want to, but I'm going to choose not to. Thule was a land from Greek mythology written about by Pythias, who was an ancient Greek explorer and geographer, stuff like that. He lived in like 300 BC or so. He said he once visited Thule, and it existed on the northernmost part of the world. Like, you couldn't go any further north from there. It was the top. Kind of like the North Pole. He said that he found it after sailing 6 days north of Britain, so common theory is that it was either Greenland or one of the Norwegian islands or pretty much any of the Scandinavian countries. Another theory is that Pythias himself was a completely unreliable narrator, so basically everything he says about everything you have to take with a grain of salt. Anyway, he said that people from Thule lived on a diet of millet and herbs as well as fruit and roots. He also claims that there was a lack of sunshine, which could theoretically lead to, you know, some actual theories about where this place was, but nobody can really place it. You know who thought they actually figured out where it was though? It'd be the bad guys of the Axis powers, the leaders, you know, the evil mustache man people. Those people from Germany. Heinrich Himmler believed that Iceland was the true legendary land of Thule, and it was actually the birthplace of the Aryan race. He sent an exploration team to check out Iceland, and he believed that they would find temples to the ancient Nordic gods, which he believed were part of the Aryan race, something like that. It was insane stuff. So basically, if you needed another reason to call these awful people crazy, there you go. Thank you so much for watching. You have absolutely no idea how much it means to me that you're watching this 3-hour video or however long it is. If you've enjoyed up to this point, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a ton. And now, let's get back into it. The Mycenaeans were the people that ruled the Greek lands during the Bronze Age and eventually took over the Minoan civilization on Crete, but there's a lot of mystery surrounding them. Some of that includes the fact that they started the Trojan War, as well as, you know, we don't know where they came from or where they disappeared to. I'm going to try to answer some of these questions. The Mycenaean civilization started in around 1750 BC, and they were immediately like a warrior elite society. Think of like the precursors to the Spartans. They had special graves that they called shaft graves, and then later tholos graves. Like they would bury their warrior elites there with their gold masks and armor and weapons, stuff like that. Before that, it's very likely that they just migrated from the Eurasia area and they took inspiration from the Mediterranean cultures as well as the Minoan civilization on Crete. It really isn't that big of a mystery as to where they came from. They just kind of migrated down. In the early 14th century BC, they would basically take over the Minoan civilization and all their territory and all that kind of stuff so they could use it for trade. At some point during these days, the mythical Trojan War was said to have taken place. Now there's a mystery for you. Most people believe that the Trojan War itself was just a story, and while the Iliad and the Odyssey definitely are just stories, the Trojan War probably did happen. The city of Troy itself was speculated upon as to whether it was real or not until it was found in the 1800s. Anyway, the Mycenaeans began to go down in the 12th century or so, and then the entire Bronze Age collapse happened. A perfect storm of drought and food shortages, as well as like political and trade disagreements, and the invasion of the mythical sea peoples caused not only Mycenaean Greece to fall, but like every other civilization of the time. I think Egypt survived, but basically everything else was kind of soft reset. They all came out of it eventually, but it really did set people back for a while. Where did the temple menorah go? Alright, if you're unaware as to what the temple menorah was, it was a 7-branched candelabra that was said to have been used in the tabernacle and the ancient temples from Jewish tradition and the Old Testament. It was made from pure gold, and it was said that they could only use fresh olive oil as fuel for the thing. Like I said, it was supposedly first built by Moses and then carried throughout the tabernacle and temple eras until the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome in like 70 AD. An arch in Rome named the Arch of Titus depicts Roman soldiers carrying stuff out of the Jewish temples and just out of Jerusalem in general. And in this depiction, they're carrying the temple menorah out. That right there is where all concrete evidence of the menorah vanishes from history. Some semi-credible sources said that the menorah was once in the Roman Temple of Peace, which was supposedly one of the most beautiful buildings in all of Rome. That is for about 100 years before somebody burned the entire building down, and all traces of it in history are basically gone. So much for that hypothesis. The menorah once again vanishes from history, and basically that's it. We don't know where it went from there. Some people think it somehow ended up back in Jerusalem. Some say it's deep within the Vatican or something like that. We really just don't know. Some people even think that it was melted down for its gold because it was supposedly made out of pure gold all those thousands of years ago. Honestly, you can choose what you believe, and you'll be just as right as any historian out there because nobody knows. Was Caesarion really Caesar's son? This question is one that I've actually had myself whenever I've been researching Rome and Egypt and everything to do with Julius Caesar. So if you don't know, at one point in Roman history, Julius Caesar had a civil war against one of his former friends that was a member of his own triumvirate, General Pompey. Pompey, I don't know exactly how you want to pronounce it. I'm saying Pompey. Caesar chased him out of Rome and through the Mediterranean, several different other stops, but anyway, Pompey eventually landed in Alexandria, Egypt, in the port. Pompey was met by a welcoming committee, and he was actually in pretty high spirits. Like, he thought he was going to get some allies, some friends to help him fight off Caesar and his army, but actually what happened to him, he departed his boat before he could get on another boat to go anywhere in Egypt, you know, up the port, up the Strait, channel, whatever you want to call it. He was murdered on the spot. Well, Caesar was already on his way to Egypt. Like, he was chasing Pompey through the Mediterranean to there because he knew he was going there. Whenever he found out that Pompey was, you know, he decided that he was going to get involved in the Egyptian succession war. Cleopatra and one of her brothers, I think it was actually her little brother, but anyway, they were going at it for who would get control of Egypt. He fought on Cleopatra's side and helped her win the throne, and in the process, he made Rome an ally. An ally and a lover. That man Caesar was a dog, brother. This all went on between 48 and 47 BC, and at that point, Caesar was forced to go home because actual Roman politics were going on. He had to go take care of that, but his damage was already done. He and Cleopatra's love child, Caesarion, was born in like August of 47 BC. Now comes the question, was he actually Caesar's child? Lots and lots of speculation in Roman political circles went on after Caesar's death because of, you know, the line of succession, who was going to get Caesar's throne because he was, you know, dictator for life. He wasn't actually the emperor yet, but anyway, was Caesarion going to have something to do with that, or was it just going to Augustus? That was kind of the real kicker, though, because nobody even realized that Caesar had a child with Cleopatra until he died. Like, nobody knew he existed. To me, that makes me think that he wasn't the actual child of Caesar. Like, he only sprung up out of nowhere because of the line of succession. I'll spare you the back and forth Roman politics and who said he was, who said he wasn't, all that mess, but just know nobody could really prove it either way. At the end of the day, it didn't even matter because Octavian had Caesarion executed. He didn't want any issues whenever it came to the line of succession from Caesar. He just wanted to be the emperor, full stop. Boy, oh boy, he was, and he had a lot of fun doing it. The Vinca civilization in the Balkans is one of the earliest known European civilizations out there. It took place from like 6,000 to 4,500 BC, somewhere in there. It really was one of the earliest complex societies because it was obviously agrarian in nature, like they had agriculture and stuff, but they also had metalwork and they had a system of proto-writing called the Vinca symbols. Now, I covered the Vinca symbols back during the first Ancient Mysteries iceberg, but the conclusion I came to about them is that they were more of just a system of marking their property, like religious artifacts, tools, stuff like that. The fact that they even had these back then was very impressive though. Cuneiform, which was used by the, Sumerians back in ancient Mesopotamia, was really the first writing system. So the fact that these people had the proto-writing that they had 1500 years before cuneiform is very impressive to me. Like, it came out 1500 years after the Vinca culture was completely gone. The Vinca really did have it a long time before that. The Vincan people were also really, really good at crafting small artifacts out of high quality ceramic. The metalwork part also really impresses me because they would use like copper ore and they would make little trinkets, stuff like that. They didn't really have copper tools. It wasn't the Copper Age, Bronze Age, whatever you want to call it yet, but they were able to like melt it down and use it. In about 4500 BC, all of a sudden, basically everything from Vinca culture just disappears. Like everything that's associated with the Vinca culture was dated to 4500 or before. Nothing after. The whole civilization must have just collapsed. We don't know why, and we will probably never know why, but in my opinion, the Vinca culture is one of the coolest of all of them. Who were the Philistines? You remember that story of David versus Goliath? Well, David was an Israelite and Goliath was a Philistine. That's the gist of it. The Israelites were the good guys of the Bible and the Philistines were the bad, at least in the Old Testament. The Philistines were definitely real though. No matter how you feel about Old Testament stories, stuff like that, they were real. They were a group that arrived from the Mediterranean Sea into the land of Canaan or the Levant, kind of the area where Israel and Gaza and all that stuff, Lebanon, all that is. They showed up in around 1200 BC at the height of the Bronze Age collapse, which tells me that they were probably running from problems that were caused in their homeland by this Bronze Age collapse. They probably came from the Greek world because they came from the Mediterranean, from that area. They were probably some of them dang sea peoples that caused even the best of civilizations to collapse. Anyway, they settled the south coast of Canaan and they were a force to be reckoned with. Until they weren't anymore. See, they were documented as having fought the Israelites many times, as well as the Egyptians under Ramses III, and eventually the Assyrians subjugated the people. They were eventually taken over again whenever the Babylonian conquest of that entire area was going down in around 600 BC, led by King Nebuchadnezzar. From there, they just kind of disappeared. They probably just assimilated into all the other cultures around them, like the Babylonians, everybody that took them over and everywhere around that geographic area. But the thing about this was they really left no proof, no evidence that they even existed. Well, they left artifacts and stuff like that that showed you where they actually were, but there was no textual evidence. There were no scrolls, nothing like that you would have thought they would have had at the time. I mean, you can look at the history books of Israel from the same time and you can have that entire story read out, and you can look at ancient Egypt. They had textual records, everything like that. But where were these people? They had no scrolls, no nothing? Or was it, systematically wiped out by people like Israel? Who knows? They just kind of disappeared after they were conquered, so I guess a quiet existence as well. Like no writing, no nothing. It kind of makes sense. Did the 10 plagues of Egypt really happen? Man, we are heavy on the biblical stuff in this one, I'm telling you. The 10 plagues of Egypt were trials sent to Egypt to pressure the Pharaoh into letting the Israelite people leave the nation of Egypt. After his refusal to do so after each and every plague, the plagues would get worse and worse. Basically what would happen was that the plague would get so bad that the Pharaoh would agree the Israelites could leave, but then after the plague was gone, he would change his mind. The plagues are water turning to blood, frogs, lice, flies, livestock pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the killing of firstborn children. The debate as to whether or not this actually happened, and if it did, if it was caused by the Jewish or Christian God. Now, we've got pretty good historical evidence to say that something like this probably did happen. Now, one theory as to how this happened if it wasn't the Jewish God is that it was the volcanic eruption of Thera or Santorini. This eruption we know caused tons and tons of corruption and bad stuff to happen in the Greek and Mediterranean world, but it could have actually had some kind of volcanic fallout, ash, stuff like that affected the Egyptians as well. The mineral cinnabar is very red and definitely would have been contained in this volcanic ash. So if this reached Egypt, it could have turned the water, in Egypt, the waterways, the Nile, stuff like that, into the blood rivers of the plague. This would have caused the frogs to jump out of the water and flood the lands. It would have caused livestock to die because they didn't have clean water and grass. You know, they would have insects that would have field days with the bodies of the dead animals. Acid rain would have caused boils on the people. Locusts would thrive in these humid conditions, and hail would come down as well because of volcanic fallout. Even the darkness is very explainable by the clouds of ash. There's even a theory that the Egyptians sacrificed their firstborn children so that the gods would stop punishing them. That right there basically accounts for all of the plagues. Now, I'm of the opinion that this volcanic eruption and divine intervention from the Jewish God might not be mutually exclusive. Back in the Old Testament, God had a way of intervening on the earth, so basically what I'm saying is he could have caused this volcanic eruption to happen, and that's how he made it explainable to the people. It wasn't just strictly supernatural. But you might disagree, and that's your prerogative, brother. Another theory as to what could have happened is that it was red algae that infected the waters of Egypt. It's less concrete as to how this would have caused all these different plagues, but it could be an explanation. There's one thing from the stories that I really don't think is really explainable by these theories. It's that Moses parted the Red Sea whenever the Israelites left Egypt. I really don't know how that is explainable by an eruption, and I don't know. It could just be a story. We don't know. That was so long ago. It's crazy stuff. But anyway, let me know what you think about this down below. I really want to talk about it. I don't have anybody else to talk about it with, so please talk to me. The mysteries of the Parthenon. This is a good one. The Parthenon is the traditional ancient structure that you think of whenever you think of ancient Greece. It's that old temple in Athens that was dedicated to the goddess Athena, and it's basically constructed strictly of pillars like the ancient Greek pillars that we all know and love. It was built in the 5th century following the defeat of Persian invaders, and the spectacular thing about this thing is that it was built in less than 10 years. Well, probably anyway, that's what we think. Over the years, this thing has sustained tons and tons of damage, but the thing is, it's still standing. Restoration efforts on this thing have been going since 1975, and the crazy thing is, we're still not done with these. That's part of the mystery of it all. The craftsmanship of this thing was so insane that we can't replicate it. Even though we have all these modern techniques, we can't do it. Well, we can. It just takes a lot longer than 10 years. I mean, obviously, we've been working on it for 50 now, I guess. There are some incredible mathematical ratios that were used in the construction of this thing, like the golden ratio, pi, even the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence wasn't even discovered until 1200 AD, so 1700 years after this thing was constructed. How did they know about this? I guess they did figure it out. It was never passed down. I don't know how these ancient Greeks knew all this stuff. They were on a different level. To be honest, it's a little bit fishy, almost like they had some time travel or something. I'm kidding. Ignore me. I'm just a little conspiracy theorist over here in my spare bedroom rotting, talking about stuff on the internet. There are some crazy optical illusions that go on with the columns of the Parthenon. There's this thing called entasis. Basically what this means is that the columns were created with a convexness to correct the optical illusion of hollowness that the columns had whenever they built them. I don't know how they figured all this stuff out. It's way over my head. In general, it was just insane craftsmanship. Like they would figure it out as they were going, and now we can't recreate it because they were just so good. We have crazily advanced building methods and computer-assisted fabrication, but we still can't do it like they did. We have nothing on the ancient Greek builders and the Parthenon builders in specific, and I don't know that we ever will. The mystery of Homer. All right, everybody knows the basics of Homer. He wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, and he was thought to be one of, if not the best epic poet of all time. What you might not know is that nobody knows if Homer himself was actually real, and if he was, where he was born, or if the title of Homer was just that, a title. It wasn't actually a name. To start, we think he was born somewhere between 1200 and 750 BC, probably in like the 700 to 800 BC range, somewhere in there, but we're still not sure. He was definitely Greek, probably born in Ionia, which is like a modern day region of Turkey, somewhere in there, like Anatolia. I don't know. I don't know that area that well. You tell me. I don't know. I'm stupid. He wrote all this stuff in this Ionic Greek dialect, so that's why it's probably in Ionia, but you know, I'm not that smart. You tell me where he was from. Like I said earlier, all this could be a coincidence, and the title Homer could just be a pseudonym that a bunch of writers from this area used whenever they got together and wrote the stories of the Odyssey and the Iliad. Well, they probably didn't even write them. They told them, and they were verbally passed down. That's how we got most of the epic poems, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. Now, if Homer was just one guy, a lot of speculation thinks that he was a blind man. And they think this because in the Odyssey, there's this character called Demodocus who was blind, and they thought he was a self-insert of Homer. Again, this could just be a reach. He may have been a perfectly normal and not blind guy. Well, blind people are normal. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm going to get canceled over here, but at this point there's really no way to know whether he was just one guy or if he was a collection of writers and this was just a pseudonym. If he was one guy, if he was blind, where he was born, none of it. You know, when he was born, it's kind of all just up in the wind. I do like that the contemporary accounts of him give him a little bit of a backstory. Whenever I was in the 10th grade, I read the Odyssey for the first time. They made me read it, you know, in an English class. It really was one of my favorite things to ever read. I read it again in college for a world literature class. I came from being a Percy Jackson fan whenever I was a little kid. I loved Greek mythology, all that kind of stuff, and reading the Odyssey and then the Iliad, all this stuff, the Aeneid, it all kind of shows me where all the Percy Jackson demigod stuff comes from. Greek mythology and Greek history will always be one of my favorite things to study, so the fact that I get to do this on this YouTube channel is awesome to me. All that being said, whether or not Homer was real, it doesn't matter to me. I love Homer, and he'll always be one of the coolest people in ancient Greek literature to me. That dude will always be a legend to me, even if his existence stays an entire mystery. We're gonna start this thing off with Yamatai Koku, which was an ancient pre-Japanese city mentioned in a bunch of ancient Asian texts that we really don't know where it was. Yamatai was first mentioned in some ancient Chinese texts, and it kind of gives a general idea of where this city was in Japan. I'm not gonna go into crazy detail on what the Chinese record says because it's kind of old school directions, like it's telling you to go down there and take the left in the fork on the road, and then go down there a quarter of a mile, take a left past the first oak tree you see, and it's on down there 72 degrees to the north on the right past the gas station. It's that kind of direction. So anyway, we're going to move on past that. Within the Chinese record and some old Japanese text, there's kind of conflicting reports as to what island this place was actually on. Like some say it was on Honshu, some say it was on Kyushu. We really don't know. I think the coolest part of all of Yamatai was their ruler, Himiko. She's recorded in both the Chinese and Japanese record as having been a shamanist that used magic and sorcery to be the queen of this country. She ruled over it with magic. If it tells you anything, the ancient Chinese, who were the enemies of ancient Japan pretty much, they held this queen with super high respect. They were scared of her. Apparently how Himiko actually got to the throne, there was like decades of infighting between different smaller Japanese kings and stuff like that, and finally she just was chosen as their ruler. She ruled over Yamatai, which was kind of like the main kingdom of Japan of the time. At least that's how I understand it. This was in like the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD also. It wasn't like prehistoric times, but it was kind of some of the earliest stuff in Japan that we know about. When Queen Himiko passed away, the ruling of Yamatai passed down to another like male guy, just another king. It wasn't her son because she never married, but anyway, it kind of all fell apart whenever she wasn't there to hold it together. The kingdom of Yamatai splintered again, and there was a bunch of infighting, and it just kind of went back to lawlessness for a while. Yamatai did have a good run under Himiko, and I think that it was very progressive of them to have a queen at the time that ruled instead of, you know, a king. So that's pretty cool. Where was Homer's Ithaca? All right, so we all know the story of Homer and the Odyssey and all that kind of stuff. If you watched my video last week, you sure do because I went into depth on it, but here's a little bitty summary. The Odyssey is an epic poem written by Homer about the hero Odysseus and his journey home back to the island of Ithaca from his fighting time in the Trojan War. It's widely accepted that Odysseus's Ithaca, like his homeland, was the actual Greek island of Ithaca because that just makes sense. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of elements of fantasy within Homer's story because it was an epic poem and Odysseus may or may not have even been real, but people still debate on whether or not this Ithaca was Ithaca or if it was another island. The thing is, the geographic landmarks that Homer describes as having been on Ithaca really don't line up with the actual Ithaca, so that's where all the speculation comes from. The most popular theory that it is not the island of Ithaca is that it's part of the island of Kephallonia. On Kephallonia is a little peninsula called Paliki, and I'll show you what this looks like. I'll show you it on a map. The guys that pitched this theory, specifically a guy named Robert Biddlestone, say that once upon a time this Paliki Peninsula was not connected to the mainland of the island of Kephallonia. Like it was its own little island. He says that when you look at the topography of this little peninsula called Paliki, it lines up with Homer's Ithaca. Like all the landmarks, everything's the same. Alright, so all that's cool. If this peninsula of Paliki was once an island known as Ithaca, why is it now connected to the mainland of Kephallonia? He argues that a bunch of dadgum earthquakes and seismic activity have connected this Paliki to Kephallonia. He actually might be onto something there. There's some old records from around 200 BC that refer to these two islands, this Paliki and Kephallonia, as separate independent islands. Biddlestone even roped in a geologist to look at this stuff and see why they were connected, because once upon a time they probably weren't, and the geologist agrees with his theory that they were independent islands once upon a time. There's a little fault under there that kind of raised the ground and connected the islands. That's great, and I like this theory a lot. I like the fact that Paliki might have been this Ithaca. It wasn't the actual Ithaca, but I can play devil's advocate right here a little bit and say that if there was seismic activity that connected these two islands and changed the landscape of them, why couldn't there have been seismic activity that changed the actual surface of the island of Ithaca from, the real Ithaca? In my mind, you could easily say that just the landscape changed because of that, and Ithaca was actually Homer's Ithaca. It just looks different now. I don't know. I'm not sure about any of this. I'm just kind of talking out loud here. I don't know if it was Paliki or if it was the actual island of Ithaca. It's pretty cool, and this stuff has got my brain going. Like, I don't even know if Odysseus was real or not. I never thought he was, but he might have been. Who knows? I don't know. The Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is one of the most well-known Bible stories of all time, and quite literally one of the earliest ancient mysteries of all time. It's not just in the Bible though. There's different forms of this story that are told in ancient cultures all across the world. The gist of the story is this: the people from the ancient world all lived pretty close in proximity. They all gathered in the lower Mesopotamian area, and they all spoke the same language, so what they decided to do was band together and build a tower that would reach the heavens. God came down and witnessed what they were doing, and he actually got a little bit scared of the human spirit. Like, he's decided that if they were to band together and reach the heavens with a tower, it would be horrible. There would be no ends to what they could do, so he decided to confuse all their languages and scatter them across the globe. All this confused language pretty much forms the basis of all the languages that we know today. That's how we got different groups on different parts of the world, according to this story anyway. This story is incredible, and I will tell it every single time I get the chance. I just love it. But anyway, it might just be a folktale that was meant to explain things in a way that the ancient people could rationalize how they get different languages and how they got different people on different parts of the globe. Or it might have been what actually happened. We don't really know. I know most of you out there probably don't believe this, and it might be a little bit silly to you, but I'm a Christian. I gotta kind of believe in this. It's just part of it. Anyway, we do have some real ideas about what the tower might have been, or at least what the story itself was based on. There is a huge ziggurat called the Intimananki that was in the ancient city of Babylon that was probably built somewhere between like the 14th century and 9th century BC, somewhere in there. That's the boring answer though. Legend has it that the ancient tyrant king Nimrod made his people build this thing, and he made them build it 300 feet tall. He wanted to defy God and also make Abraham mad, because Abraham, who was probably Abram at that time, refused to help him build this, and a whole bunch of other people also did as well. Now, this same story says that Alexander the Great was the one who toppled this tower whenever he did his conquest of the world. Now, how did we get here? We went from King Nimrod in the way ancient BCs to Alexander the Great, who was the greatest conqueror of all time, basically. It just blows my mind. It's so cool though. Like, Alexander the Great was so awesome. I don't know. If that was a lot, there are some even taller tales. Literally. The Tharu, I think that's how you pronounce it, tribe of Nepal and India says that the Tower of Babel, or at least their ancient tower, their form of this story, was 1.6 miles tall. They said that it was built to survive another great flood if that were to happen. And that's another thing about this thing. Across the ancient world, there was stories of the great flood and towers built to survive the next great flood. It's crazy stuff. It's getting harder and harder for me to believe that none of this stuff actually happened, because there's like a nexus point that is the flood and the tower and all these ancient cultures. But anyway, let me know what you think about that down below. Venus figurines. Venus figurines are little ancient figurines that have larger proportions, if you know what I'm talking about, that date all the way back to like 35,000 BC. Most of them are actually from the period that was 21 to 26,000 years ago, but still, that's way in the past. These things are usually found in like the mainland of Europe, but some have even been found far in Asia and like Siberia, places like that. They're typically carved out of some kind of soft stone or like bone, or sometimes even fired clay, like they had terracotta figurines sometimes. They're widely accepted to be one of, if not the earliest form of human art. Alright, so those proportions I mentioned, they're supposedly symbolic of like health and fertility in women. It's easy to assume that these things were kept as little symbols of fertility because, child mortality rates and birth rates, all that kind of stuff, everything was horrible back in the day. That's why death rates are skewed so far down to like 30 years old. But anyway, that's not the point of this video. These things might have even been used as little like figures that women could hold during childbirth for good luck, symbols of fertility. These could also be religious symbols, like they could be representative of some ancient goddess or something like that they worshipped. I've always heard rumors of some ancient mother goddess that had some kind of foothold in the Eurasian area, so this would actually make sense, like it was representative of her, something like that. But really, we don't know what these Venus figurines were for. They're just really cool because they're so old. What happened to Queen Nefertiti? Queen Nefertiti was the wife of the pharaoh Akhenaten, who was that guy that tried to change the entirety of Egypt's religion from polytheism under all those different gods to monotheism under the sun god Aten. She was also probably the stepmother of King Tut, if that tells you anything. She served as the queen of Egypt from around 1350 BC to 1335 BC or somewhere in there, but anyway, that was until she completely vanished from the history books. Her husband Akhenaten passed away around that time, and that's where all the speculation comes in. What happened to her after he died? Some people actually think that she herself served as a pharaoh in between the time of Akhenaten and King Tut. This is pushed by those that look at the ancient depictions of the couple that was Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They would be shown together as equals, not some lording pharaoh over his lowly queen wife. No, they were like equals. They equally ruled over Egypt, supposedly. This was probably because of their new ideals of monotheism and however Akhenaten thought Atenism would work under that sun god. In some of these, she's even depicted as the pharaoh, which is another key to all this speculation. Kind of alongside this theory, there's this co-regent that's shown alongside Akhenaten that was known as like Neferuaten. I think that was the name that some people think was this female pharaoh that was Nefertiti. Apparently this figure in history took over after Akhenaten passed away. Completely switching gears here and changing from everything that was saying Nefertiti was a ruler herself. Whenever Akhenaten died, this theory says that Nefertiti and everybody involved in Atenism was driven out of Egypt. The people that took over wanted to reinstall polytheism. They didn't believe in the monotheistic Aten god, anything like that. So they got rid of that entire regime. Another theory says that Nefertiti actually tricked the public into thinking she was a man and then she ruled over as a pharaoh. This actually has a precedent because Hatshepsut did the same exact thing in Egypt a long time before that. Like she even had a fake beard, I think. Anyway, the most boring theory is that she simply got sick and passed away. I personally hope she served as the outright female pharaoh for a time before King Tut took over, but that might be a little bit optimistic. I don't know. You decide what you think and you let me know down below. The Inca-Egypt Enigma. This is a phenomenon that describes the tons of connections that the ancient Incans had with the ancient Egyptians. It's more like the ancient Mesoamericans, not just the Incans, but anyway, same people, same area, you know, with the Egyptians. They might be on opposite sides of the world, but you gotta admit there's tons of similarities in their cultures. Mesoamerica was primarily made up of the South American countries up to like central Mexico, and as you probably know, the oldest known civilization in that area was the Olmecs, starting in like 1500 BC or so. The Egyptians started their reign in like 3000 BC or something like that, so they're a lot older than the Mesoamericans, but this kind of makes sense to me. If all of human life started in the Mesopotamian area, and I'm not saying that it did, please don't kill me, at least until I hit 1,000 subscribers. Don't crucify me, I don't want to die. Anyway, if that happened, it would take a lot longer for people to get to Mesoamerica than it would to take to get them to Egypt. It'd take a long time for them to get all the way to the Americas and set up shop there. That's all I'm saying. But yet again, I don't know where human life started. I don't know where all this happened. I wasn't there whenever humans were created, or however you see it come to pass. Don't crucify me. Just leave me alone, please. If you disagree with me, you're probably right. Just saying. Now, as I was saying, the Mesoamericans had ancient architecture that was crazy. They had an ancient hieroglyphics. They had everything that was very similar to the Egyptians. They even had like astronomical systems. They were really big on the sun and the moon and the stars, you know, the stuff that Egypt was big on. Egypt had all this stuff first, technically, but I'm telling you, the similarities between these two cultures are crazy. Both had pyramids, they had step pyramids, they had religions that were really not that far off from each other. They were just deific representations of suns and stars, stuff like that. It's just, it blows my mind, really. They theoretically never crossed paths with one another unless they all started in the same little area, right? So where does that leave us? Well, some actually propose the theory that both cultures evolved from people that fled the sinking island of, can you guess it? We don't go a single video without mentioning it, Atlantis. That's right, whenever Atlantis was sinking, some people started paddling and some landed in Egypt, and the other people started paddling and landed in Mesoamerica. There's little to no evidence that supports all this, but it's pretty fun to think about, really. The earliest pyramid in Egypt, which was called the Pyramid of Djoser, or however you say that, was very similar to the step pyramids in like Teotihuacan and, you know, Peru, everywhere like that. They're even built in very similar orientation to the sun and the astronomical bodies. It's kind of crazy, really. They use similar techniques around their burials, like they even have mummification in Mesoamerica, and that's what Egypt is famous for. They bury them with gold artifacts, stuff like that. Of course, that's kind of everywhere across the world. We're gonna ignore that part, but anyway, all the similarities are crazy. Now, I don't believe the whole Atlantis theory, and you might not believe the fact that everybody started in one little corner of the world. That's where humans were created, something like that. But all these similarities are creepy, and the fact that at the end of the day, we have no concrete explanation as to how this happened is Kind of cool. Legio 9 Hispana. This was a Roman legion that served primarily under Augustus in Hispania, if you can't tell by the name. It actually existed from around the 1st century BC to around 120 AD, and the mysterious part about them is that they just kind of vanished. The most common and likely theory is that they were fighting a war against the Celtic tribes in Britain, and they just lost and they were wiped out. Now, this is actually a huge deal in British and Scottish cultures because they saw their people as the underdogs and the Romans as the, top dogs that they were going to try to beat down. You always love an underdog story, and that's who the British were. See what happened whenever America fought Britain. We were the underdogs, and you see who won that. But anyway, I don't know why I got so aggressive there. There's actually a whole movie about this legion called The Eagle because the bronze eagle was the battle standard of this legion. Whatever happened to this eagle is kind of symbolic of what happened to the legion. The Ninth most likely had to go over there and quell this British uprising because of these tribes. These tribes destroyed them, and it was really bad. But all this led to Hadrian, the emperor, putting up Hadrian's Wall to separate Roman territory from the British barbarians to the north. Now, this wall did work, but it became a political symbol for the area for years and years to come. That pretty much became the legacy of the Ninth. They completely disappeared. Nobody really even cared. They just put up this wall and said, forget it. Kind of a sad story if you really think about it. The mystery of Jesus' missing 18 years. This is one of my favorite topics that I've ever researched simply because I've never really thought about it. In the Bible, Jesus was born and then he wasn't really heard from again until he was 12 years old, sitting down with temple leaders having serious conversations about religion. After that, he's not heard from again until he's 30. What in the world was this guy doing for those 18 years? I know from personal experience, I'm 24 right now, these are probably the most formative years in any man's life, so what was he doing? That also begs the question, why don't we know what he was doing? Because if it was some of the most formative years of anybody's life and he's one of the most important people in all of history, kind of important to know, don't you think? I'm going to talk about that here in a second because it actually irritates me. Traditional knowledge says that Jesus was simply a carpenter for those 18 years working with his dad. I find it hard to believe that that was all he was doing because he was Jesus. I mean, he was 100% man and 100% God. He was part of the Godhead. The most likely answer is that he was simply a carpenter for those 18 years, but he was traveling that little area of Israel, from city to city, spreading some kind of good word, talking about stuff to come. All right, here's what I was going to mention. There's a theory out there that says that the Catholic Church holds the secrets of these 18 years in their halls at the Vatican. This makes me extremely mad because I don't know why the Vatican thinks they have the right to keep all that knowledge from us, from the rest of the Christian world. It just makes no sense to me. The Catholic Church is a man-made institution. It was not established in the Bible. I'm on a rant about Catholicism again. I don't have anything against Catholics. I don't like the institution of the Catholic Church, and I never will. Anyway, let's talk about what Jesus was doing for those 18 years. One of these theories says that Jesus went on a great walkabout across the entire Eurasian continent, learning from great religious leaders, Buddhist monks, stuff like that. Some say he traveled to India and Persia doing this, kind of spreading the word and learning from others. Some say that he went with Joseph of Arimathea, who was the guy who paid for his tomb, that he traveled with him to Britain and spread the word there. And some even say that he trained as a Buddhist monk himself. I don't know about that one, but the rest of it sounds, it's pretty cool. Technically, of all times in history, this would have been like the safest time to do this back in those days, at least. This was the area of the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, which means that basically anybody could do whatever they want without fear of repercussions because everybody was terrified of the Roman government because they were just those guys. They controlled everything. They could have walked around, they could have traveled in caravans, they could have sailed the seas to the Greek islands, stuff like that. All this would be okay because they wouldn't have to worry about pirates or muggers or anybody else because of the Romans. Now, I don't know if there's any truth behind this theory that Jesus went on a great walkabout and spread the word and learned from other religious leaders, but I really do think it's cool that Jesus might have been on like a Pokemon trainer type of adventure across the Eurasian continent and the Greek islands, stuff like that, collecting knowledge and spreading his own knowledge. If the Catholic Church does hold these secrets, maybe one day we'll find out what actually happened. That's not going to happen. What happened to the 10 lost tribes of Israel? Man, we got another Bible entry here. The 10 lost tribes of Israel were the 10 tribes that made up the Israeli kingdom after the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah kind of split up into two. This kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians in around 720 BC, and from then on, nobody really knows what happened to the people that made up the country, those 10 tribes. The kingdom of Judah survived another century or so until they were conquered by the Babylonians in 587 BC. Those two tribes of Judah pretty much make up what we know of as Israel today, like what was Israel during Jesus' times, stuff like that. But what happened to the others? Well, we can guess for the most part, they just assimilated into other populations. They were supposedly exiled to the upper Mesopotamian area and the Medes, which would have been like Syria and Iraq. An interesting account about these lost 10 tribes comes to us from a guy named Benjamin of Tudela, who was a explorer that explored Eurasia and Africa, places like that, in the 12th century AD. He claims to have come across Jewish tribesmen from the tribes of Dan, Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali that were settled in Persia. In Arabia, he found more that were of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. If you can't tell, this mystery goes way back, like centuries, all the way back to 1200 at least AD, whenever these guys were looking for the Jewish tribesmen. An explorer named Bartolome de las Casas in the 16th century claimed that the Indians from the West Indies were actually Jewish tribesmen. I don't know exactly how he figured that one, but he's not the only one that had some crazy ideas of who these lost tribesmen would have been. Several groups in Africa claim to be descendants from these lost tribesmen of Israel, especially some from Ethiopia. Even places like China and Japan claim to have been influenced by these lost tribes, if not direct descendants of them. Some Japanese have the idea that the first ancient samurai came to them from Samaria, which was the capital of that northern Israeli kingdom. I personally don't believe any of these fringe theories. I think more so that they kind of just assimilated into the other populations of the Eurasian continent. But it would be hilarious if by some crazy chance the people that were once the chosen people of God, the ancient Israeli, were the ones who made anime in Japan now. They have the power of God and anime on their side. The mysteries of the Great Sphinx of Giza. I just said earlier that an entry was one of my favorite that I've ever researched, but I'll say it again right now. Everything to do with the mysteries of the Sphinx and the pyramids, everything like that, that's some of my hyperfixations these days. I mean, I made an entire dedicated video to this topic a couple weeks ago. The Sphinx has nothing but mysteries, and I'll cover some of these shortly in this video. If you want more, you can check out that long one after this one. First of all, the Sphinx might be a lot older than we think. We think it was created in around 2500 BC, but recent research on the erosion patterns on the exterior of the Sphinx show that it could be like 10,000 years old, or at least 10,000 BC, so even older than that. See, the thing is, the erosion on the pyramids suggests that wind and sand hit them and eroded them since, whenever they were created, 2500 BC, something like that. But the Sphinx shows water erosion that's only possible from like great flooding. The Nile River flooded a lot between the years of like 15,000 or so BC to 10,000 BC, so the Sphinx is probably that old, or at least that's what we think. And by we, I mean fringe conspiracy theorists. The actual Egyptologists do not agree with this at all. If you say that around Zahi Hawass, who's a great Egyptologist who's been featured on Joe Rogan, he will probably just pull out a Glock and shoot you. I'm not even kidding. Next, we have another theory that comes to us from a guy named Edgar Casey, who was a clairvoyant from America in like the 20s or something like that, the 1920s that is. He says that the Sphinx contains a hall of records underneath it. This hall of records is supposedly a library of Atlantis. There we are again. We can't even go half a video without talking about it. This theory is literally tied into what we talked about earlier. Whenever Atlantis sank into the ocean and the Atlanteans fled and landed in Egypt, they started ancient Egypt. Obviously, they were instrumental in building the Sphinx and this hall of records underneath it. I think it's only right that we start this one out with a city completely lost to history, the lost city of Z. This was a city theorized to have been in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, but here's the kicker: the guy who theorized this went looking for it and disappeared. Percy Fawcett was a British military officer and explorer who primarily worked in mapping and exploring South America. He lived from the year 1867 through 1925, which is the year he went missing. Him, his son, and his son's friend all went out into the Amazon rainforest looking for the lost city of Z, and they were never seen again. Because Fawcett was an explorer of this area, he studied the ancient cultures of the area, and somehow he came up with this idea of the lost city of Z. Legend has it that this area had tons of complex societies before Europeans ever had any interaction with the South Americans whatsoever. Fawcett's obsession with this ancient culture and this lost city only skyrocketed whenever he found a manuscript written in 1753. It was written by a Portuguese Portuguese bandeirante, or basically their idea of a colonizer or something like that. And I may be pronouncing that completely wrong. I'm pretty stupid, so let me know. Now, this manuscript is known as Manuscript 512. It basically says that these Portuguese guys found the ancient ruins of a city that was amazing. It had temples, arches, ruins, everything you can imagine. It even had hieroglyphics within one of the temples. Fawcett became completely obsessed with that idea, so in 1925, he set off to find it. I like the theory that he actually found this city and it's like a utopia, a paradise, so he just never came back. And now there's like Elvis and Tupac and everybody that ever disappeared, they're just chilling right there. That's definitely not true, but at least it's a little bit hopeful. Now, recent developments using LiDAR have actually shown that there are ancient ruins down there in the Amazon forest. There is architecture down there, and there are remains of ancient pyramids in the Amazon rainforest, which is completely random. This might not be Fawcett's ancient city of Z of legend, but it proves that the ancient Amazonians did have complex societies. Maybe Z was real after all. The mystery of the Hypogeum. Also known as the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum, this is an ancient necropolis and temple and sanctuary found in Paola, Malta. It's a massive underground structure that was thought to have been built in around the year 4000 BC. Obviously, it was constructed by the Maltese people of that area, and it remained in use until around 1500 BC, probably. Here's a funny story about the discovery of the Hypogeum. Around the year 1902, there was a stonemason who was working building a bunch of foundations for houses above the Hypogeum, but nobody knew it was there, obviously. As they were setting the foundations for these houses, you know, laying bricks, whatever they were doing in 1902, one of his workers accidentally stumbled upon the remains of the Hypogeum just underneath the ground. Because this was obviously a massive contract, they were building a bunch of houses, foundations, and this was a lot of work for the stonemasons. They kind of tried to cover it up. Somehow word got out that this temple was there under the ground, and the stonemasons probably got in trouble, but anyway, the government got involved then. In 1903, that entire area above the Hypogeum and obviously the Hypogeum under the ground became public property. They started excavating the Hypogeum, and they found that there were 3 levels. The upper level consisted of a bunch of like burial chambers. It was basically just a continuation of the natural caves that were underneath the ground to start with. The middle level contained more of the temple stuff, like it had an oracle room, it had a holy room, it had several different areas in that middle section. There were a bunch of artifacts and stuff like that found on every single level, but the most important one of all of them was this thing known as the Sleeping Lady. This thing most likely symbolized some sort of mother goddess, so it had something to do with that worship that took place on that middle level. The lower level of the Hypogeum was kind of just boring, like there weren't even any bodies or anything like that. Now, as I said, tons of pottery and carvings and ancient figurines, stuff like that, all that was found within these chambers. There were also tons of human remains, like 7,000 people worth. And some of these people had elongated skulls. We've talked about that before on this channel. So the Hypogeum is really cool. It showed advanced engineering and structural work, architecture, stuff like that from people way back in like 4000 BC. I think the discovery story is really the coolest part about it all though. The Saqqara bird. The Saqqara bird is an ancient Egyptian model bird made out of sycamore wood and mounted to a stick. It was found in the 1898 excavation of somebody's tomb in ancient Egypt. It dates back to approximately 200 BC. Now this thing literally looks like a bird or an airplane. We figure it's a bird because obviously they didn't have airplanes or anything like that, and the falcon was extremely important to the ancient Egyptians, and we're about to talk about that. But some people theorize that this Saqqara bird was modeled after an ancient aircraft that these Egyptians saw. So this thing has wings and it has a vertical tail that looks like an airplane. Some people even thought that this thing would actually fly. It won't fly, but if you used lighter weight wood and add some kind of vertical stabilizer on the back, it probably would. It would be some sort of model glider. Now, obviously, the most common interpretation is that this thing represented the falcon. The falcon represented 2 different ancient Egyptian gods, so that would make the most sense. There was literally a falcon deity named Horus in ancient Egypt, and another deity that the falcon represented named Ra Horakti. I probably didn't say that right, but anyway, the falcon was important to these people. It could have been used as a toy or some sort of weather vane or literally anything. I think I'm going to stick with the crazy theory that it actually represents some sort of ancient aircraft that flew over because, you know, aliens, Egypt, they just intertwine perfectly. That's literally what happened. That's what we're going with. Did Herostratus really exist? Herostratus was an ancient Greek arsonist who allegedly burned down the second temple of Artemis in Ephesus. The temple of Artemis was sacred and used in worship and religion, all that kind of stuff for many, many years before the first temple was destroyed. The first temple was destroyed by a flood, but in 560 BC, it was rebuilt into this second temple. Now, it's important to note that this second temple allegedly took over a century mystery to complete, so it's got to be like awesome, right? Well, it was. It was one of the ancient 7 wonders of the world as written by Herodotus, not Herostratus, who burned it down. On July 21st of 356 BC, this guy Herostratus allegedly burned down the second temple of Artemis. Now, this second temple was burned down, but whether Herostratus actually did it or not is up in the air. Apparently, he did this to immortalize his name. He wanted people to talk about him and mention his name forever. To combat this and to tell the people that you literally can't just do whatever you want to be immortalized in history, the Greeks executed him and forbid his name from ever being spoken aloud ever again. Like, he couldn't be written about, his story could not be told because the death penalty would hang over those who, talked about him. Also, it just so happens that this day that this temple was burned down was the exact day that Alexander the Great was born. That's going to come into play later. Now, we got to talk about whether or not this Herostratus guy was actually real or not. For the most part, we think this story of Herostratus is more of an ancient Greek parable. This guy will forever live in our memories as somebody who did whatever it took to achieve notoriety and fame, and that's a bad thing. There's literally a term, herostratic fame, which is talking about this kind of person. Think about a streamer on Kick or something who goes out and commits crimes while live streaming it just to get some views. That's herostratic fame. Honestly, it's been so long and we're so far removed from when Herostratus actually lived, if he did live, that we really don't know if he was real or not. Regardless of that, we can learn a lot from his story. I'm of the personal opinion that he was not real and this is more of just a story to pass along a moral, but you think what you want to. The fact that he did this on the same day that Alexander the Great was born and it just a bunch of overlap and stuff like that makes me think it was more of a story than anything. Let me know what you think down below. Just real quick, thank you so much for watching. You have no idea how much it means to me. If you're enjoying this video, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out more than you could ever know. And now, let's get back into it. Scythian ritual gold. First of all, the Scythian people were warrior nomad people that lived in the Eurasian steppe from the 8th century BC through the 2nd century BC. So think like from the old Soviet Union over here in Eastern Europe to, Western Asia, all the way over to like Manchuria, China, that entire region, kind of along the area of the Silk Road. Actually, it was a little bit north of that, but anyway. They were horse archers who inspired fear in tons of people because they were so powerful. They had a lot to do with horses. It was actually kind of weird. Like, they had horse sacrifices. They were buried with horses. It was really weird stuff. The Scythians had a crazy lust for gold, as the Romans called it. These people believed that gold possessed divine power and glory, so they gathered as much of it as possible. Whenever they gathered it or made it or whatever they did, most of it went to the Scythian kings. These people also believed that with that divine power and glory came a solar nature. What does that mean? Well, it means that some sort of celestial fire was associated with this divine power and glory, so only those that were able to take that should be in possession of the gold. That means the kings had it. That also means the kings probably made this religion, this stereotype of gold having this great power so that they could have more gold. At least that's probably how it started, anyway. These Scythian kings also had some sort of ritual where they would sleep with a gold artifact out in the open sky, something like that, because it would symbolize the impregnation of the earth and also gold falling from the sky. It's a lot of really weird stuff. That's where that Scythian ritual gold comes in. Now, obviously, whenever kings died, they were buried with lots and lots of gold. I guess this had to do with the celestial power they held. They believed that it would help them get to the afterlife or something. I really don't know. There have also been burial mounds known as kurgans found that these Scythian people created that were absolutely full of gold. Like, they had gold sheets, gold clothing, gold artifacts, gold bracelets, everything you can imagine. These Scythian people were really good at manipulating gold as well. Like, they were good at metallurgy. They could melt little tiny grains of gold down and make them into, intricate designs, different artifacts, stuff like that. It was really cool. They were really good at it. There are these little bowl-like things that they call Scythian vessels that had crazily detailed scenes. Like, I'm going to throw these things on screen for you to see them. Just look at this for yourself and tell me these people weren't awesome. I think they even went on to influence like Greek and Persian art, so that's pretty cool also. Faunus Heraklion. Now, Faunus and Heraklion were two different cities that were thought to be different cities, right? But they're not. They were the same place, so I'm just going to call it Faunus for ease of me saying this stuff. Faunus was an ancient Egyptian city that was founded in probably the 8th century BC or something like that. It was the original port of the Nile, into Egypt before Alexandria was ever established. Thanks, Alexander. It actually may have been founded way before the 8th century BC. That's just whenever people talk about about it the most. But anyway, it was a city that sunk to the bottom of the ocean. We didn't even know that it was real until we found it in 2000. This place is literally the real Atlantis, except for the fact that it was right there off the coast of Egypt. The entire city sunk into the ocean because of changing ocean currents, stuff like that. I guess it wasn't built on a very strong foundation. Actually, there were some fault lines that probably moved, and that's why it all sunk into the ocean, and that's why people thought that it was two different cities until recently. Now, in the remains of this city, over 70 ancient ships have been found sunk, which is like the largest group of ships that we've ever found sunk at the bottom of the ocean ever. There were also statues of like the first Cleopatras and the ancient god Happy or Hoppy, however you say that, and just other stuff, tons of it. Artifacts, Greek architecture because, you know, the Ptolemies, and just all the crazy stuff you might imagine would be in an ancient Egyptian city that sunk to the bottom of the ocean. This city had a large temple to Khonshu, which is, you know, the Moon Knight guy from the MCU. If you play Marvel Rivals, they say something about Khonshu if you've seen the Moon Knight TV show, Oscar Isaac, all that good stuff. Fun fact, Hercules was also known as the Greek version of Khonshu somehow. I don't know how that got crosswired, kind of like Thoth and Hermes or something like that. But anyway, this city was basically built on adjoining islands in the Nile Delta, which is why, you know, it was thought to be two different cities. As of today, only 5% of this entire city has been excavated. We literally have no idea what still remains down there, and that's really cool to me. Atlantis is one of my favorite things in the world to talk about, and it has tie-ins to ancient Egypt, all that kind of good stuff. So the fact that ancient Egypt had their own version of this that was actually real is pretty cool. Vault B of Padmanabhaswamy Temple. I definitely am not saying Padmanabhaswamy right because that's just really hard for me to pronounce. But anyway, the Padmanabhaswamy Temple is a Hindu temple in Kerala, India that's dedicated to the god Vishnu. It contains several shrines and has rituals go down at it all the time. It's really cool. Actually, if you look at it, I'm looking at it right now on this screen over here. It kind of culminates in everything you would imagine that Indian religion to have in their temples. It's really cool. Here's the thing. Underneath this temple, there are at least 6 vaults that are absolutely full of treasure, and we know this because they opened all of them but one. They have vault A, B, C, D, E, and F. They actually also found G and H, and I don't think they've opened them yet. The government of India decided to open up these vaults in 2011, and they found literally billions of dollars worth of artifacts and gold and just crazy stuff. It says just in Vault A, there were over 102,000 artifacts found in that vault. So what's the deal with Vault B? If there's millions of dollars worth of stuff, they probably want to get it out of there, right? Well, they do want to get it out of there, but the Supreme Court of India blocked them from opening that vault because of religious reasons and superstitions and stuff like that. This Vault B is by far the largest of all the vaults. Some of this superstition is born from the fact that there are 3 doors to opening the vault, at least 3. There's an outer metal door, there's a wooden door second, and then there's another iron door. During this whole 2011 fiasco, whenever they were opening up these other vaults, they opened the first one, they opened that steel door on the outside, then they opened the wooden door, and then they tried to open that iron door, but it was jammed shut. They called a locksmith to come help them open that door, but before the locksmith came out there, the Supreme Court blocked them from opening the door. It's almost like something is protecting this vault from being opened. There's tons of superstition around it, and people think that religion is holding it back, like the gods don't want them to open that door because something's back there. It's really cool. This is one of the coolest stories I think I've ever read about something in the real world. Obviously, we have no idea what's back there, but eventually, hopefully, we find out. Hopefully, they open it within our lifetime. Or maybe, hopefully they don't. There might be some kind of ancient evil behind that vault door that we just don't want to be unleashed upon this world. Where is Ankhesenamun's tomb? Ankhesenamun was an Egyptian queen born in around the year 1350 BC. She was born the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, so she had like a crazy lineage. She also became the wife of the pharaoh King Tut. So yeah, she was awesome. As we all know, around the age of 18, King Tut suddenly died. This left Ankhesenamun alone as the Egyptian queen without any heir or anything. She was only 21 years old and didn't have any living children. After King Tut died, she was afraid that she was going to be forced into a marriage that she did not want with the successor of King Tut. So she wrote to the Hittite king and said that she wanted a husband. The Hittites sent an envoy over to Egypt to figure out who sent this letter because they didn't know exactly who it was. She didn't put her exact name because, you know, if somebody found out that she wasn't wanting to marry the successor, she would probably be murdered. But anyway, this envoy himself on the way to Egypt was murdered. So apparently she never got to hook up with the Hittites like she wanted to. That's basically the end of her story. That's all we know about her, but where was she buried and why is this important? Well, the fact that we don't know where she was buried and where her story ends means that, you know, she could have gone over there to the Hittites or to literally anywhere else. In Egypt, there's this area called the Valley of Kings, which has a bunch of burial mounds and tombs, whatever you want to call them, for ancient pharaohs and their families. It's theorized that she may be in there somewhere, but nobody's ever actually found her. There's a valley to the west of this Valley of Kings known as the Valley of Monkeys. It's theorized that she might be buried in there, but nobody really knows for sure. She's probably either there or in some tomb close to King Tut's that we just haven't excavated yet. But this story was awesome, so I thought it was worth sharing with you. The Turin Erotic Papyrus. I'm giggling like a little kid talking about this because this Turin Erotic Papyrus is exactly what you might think it is. It's an erotic piece of paper. They call it the world's first men's magazine. This is an ancient Egyptian papyrus that was created in around 1150 BC or so, and it shows exactly what you think it does. I'm not going to show it to you on screen because I don't think I can, but it shows men and women doing their thing on a scroll. There are 12 different positions that they are shown in this papyrus. Who created this thing? I don't know. This thing was discovered in 1825 in a small village in Egypt. You need to look this scroll up for yourself because you need to see this. These phallic symbols, you know what I'm talking about, they're very large. Apparently this thing is interpreted as to having a single male protagonist, so the guy is the same in every single picture, and I don't know if the girls are the same or not. I don't even want to know. Apparently it wasn't meant to be exciting in that way, you know what I'm saying? It was more so to mock aristocracy or something like that, something political all the way back in Egypt. I'm not gonna look that far into it. I just think it's funny. There's also a part of this scroll where animals are performing human tasks, and I might can show this on screen, I don't know, but anyway, it's supposed to be funny and satirical in nature, the whole entire thing. So yeah, that was that. The Mysteries of Kefalonia Island. Kefalonia is an Ionian island in western Greece. It's got a lot of mysterious stuff about it, like a moving stone and a cave that seems to go on forever. At least the water through the cave does. But anyway, before I talk about that, I want to tell you something about Homer. If you remember Homer's story, the Odyssey, I'm sure you do, Odysseus came home to Ithaca. Ithaca has traditionally been thought to be the island of Ithaca because that's an actual Greek island. However, if you look at Homer's descriptions of Ithaca and the way Odysseus approached it, what the geography was, all that good stuff, it's probably not Ithaca. The island of Kefalonia draws a perfect comparison to the island of Ithaca from Homer's story. Now, there is a peninsula that's kind of separated by water now, but that was not there all those years ago. That's probably because of rising sea levels, something like that. This whole thing's a complete tangent, but I want you to know that the island of Kefalonia is really cool, and I truly believe that it was Ithaca from Homer's Odyssey. Anyway, let's talk about the mysteries. First of all, there are these natural pools of water called oldthrace. Probably not saying that right. For centuries, nobody knew where the seawater that made up these pools was going. There were even earthquakes that hit the island of Kefalonia that seemed to have no effect on these pools of seawater. By the way, this earthquake probably had something to do with changing the geography of this traditional Ithaca island, if you're asking me, but anyway. In 1963, a group of Austrian geologists did some tests on these pools. Basically, they just added a bunch of coloring dye to this pool to see where the water came out. 14 days later, they found this colored water on the other side of the island, about 15 kilometers from these pools come out in the sea. So this water travels under the islands through some underground tunnels for 14 to 15 kilometers. That's crazy. There's also this moving stone known as the Cunopetra. This is a massive monolithic rock that seems to move from east to west incessantly, like it never stops. At least from the years 1900 to 1953, this was the case. They could feel vibrations all the time. This rock was constantly moving from east to west, but it never really went anywhere. It was just slowly moving. Then a massive earthquake hit in 1953 and stabilized the rock. Apparently it doesn't move anymore, but a constantly moving stone for hundreds of years, supposedly, that's pretty cool. There are also strange acoustics within caves on Kefalonia Island, which is pretty cool, I guess. A lot of the mystique and stuff around Kefalonia dates back to the Odyssey and Homer, all that good stuff. So overall, The island of Kefalonia is just really cool to me. The Xiongnu were a tribe of nomadic people that lived in the eastern part of the Eurasian steppe from around the 3rd century BC through the 1st century AD. Basically, everything we know about them comes from ancient Chinese texts because they were a great enemy to the Chinese. Have you ever heard of the Great Wall of China? Well, the Chinese fighting against the Xiongnu prompted them to build a lot of the Great Wall of China because the Xiongnu were so devastating in their attacks. It was literally a centuries-long conflict. Now, the Xiongnu did exist before the 3rd century BC. They were around in like the 5th century BC, but they weren't really dangerous until the 3rd. A lot like the ancient Mongolians who would come like 1200 years after these people were also horseback archers. It's said that they would gather up to 300,000 horseback archers at a time to go invade China. That's crazy. If you know anything at all about everything that went on in that Eurasian steppe and in the ancient Chinese area, any of that, you know that stuff was absolutely crazy. The Xiongnu, we really don't even know who they went on to be, where they went, what happened to them. They split up into 2 different factions. Some of them went on to be in China and the rest of them went on somewhere else. Some people think that they were actually the Huns that invaded Rome in the 5th century. I don't think that's true, but it's possible, I guess. The thing is, these people had an empire in that Eurasian steppe for like 300 to 400 years or so. That was incredibly long-lived for a group of people back in those days. When you look at the ancient references of them, they have so many different linguistic links to other cultures that we really don't know who they were, who they went on to be, any of that stuff. There are theories out there that says that they were Iranian, Turkish, Yanisian, which I don't really even know who that is, but also Mongolian, everything like that. The Mongolian link makes the most sense to me because the culture was kind of the same. They had horseback archers, they were in the same area, all that good stuff. They were very similar to the Scythians, which we actually talked about in another video very recently. They were kind of in the same area. I can't tell you exactly who they were and exactly who they went on to be because we really just don't know, and if the researchers and everybody like that doesn't know, I sure don't know because I'm an idiot. Let me know who you think the Xiongnu were. The mystery of the Sumerian king list. The Sumerian king list is a list of all the ancient rulers of all the ancient city-states of ancient Mesopotamia. How many times can I say ancient in one sentence? Guess we'll find out. It's literally a list of all the different kings that ruled and when they ruled. The thing is, it dates back all the way to like 2900 BC, which was supposedly before the ancient flood of the Bible. It goes from then all the way through around 1650 BC or so. That's probably when it was created. It was written in ancient Sumerian on clay tablets. Here's the cool thing about this. In the years before the Great Flood supposedly happened, all the kings that ruled for a very long time, like mythically long. Some of these kings literally ruled for thousands of years, and that's even like biblical or extra biblical. That's a long time. After the flood supposedly happened, the dates get more realistic. Alright, so before the flood, there were literally ancient Mesopotamian gods that supposedly ruled over the people. The ancient Mesopotamian god Dumuzid was said to have ruled over the people for a certain amount of time. Besides that, there was also a king that supposedly ruled for over 43,000 years. All the time of those reigns before the flood adds up to over 240,000 years. I don't care who you are. That's crazy. In just a second, I'm going to tell you why this section probably exists. As I said, after the flood, they get more realistic and it's actual kings that are recorded in history. Scholars say that this is one of the first attempts at recording chronological history. So these were like the first historians. Now, conspiracy theorists, definitely not like me or anything, they think that this leads to some forbidden knowledge that was forgotten from ancient civilizations. So basically, you just circle back around to Atlantis and all the ancient civilizations that might have happened, that might have been lost to history. The Graham Hancock stuff. Now, the more accepted and probably correct theory is that the Sumerian king list was more of a propaganda for the ruling dynasties of the time. So what does that mean? The people that wrote these tablets obviously included the people that were ruling then and how long they ruled, all that good stuff. Their dynasties. The stuff before the flood was the stuff that was commonly accepted in society at that time as being true. So whenever you tie ancient legends to current people, you get the common people around that don't know any better thinking that these dynasties of the time descended from these legends, that they truly deserved to rule. I mean, there were literally gods that they said ruled before the flood, so the people in the current time should treat their kings like gods, right? That's probably what was going on there. But what do I know? I'm just a 24-year-old dude who talks about stupid stuff on the internet. Noah's Ark in Mount Ararat. Obviously, this entry is going to talk about Noah's Ark during the Great Flood. More specifically, where it came to rest. If you don't know the biblical account of the Great Flood, basically God decided to flood the earth because everybody was evil. Everybody but Noah. Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives. Them and 2 of every animal boarded on an ark. This ark survived the complete flooding of the world. Now, Genesis chapter 8. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens had been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky. The water receded steadily from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down, and on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. Now, Mount Ararat, Noah's ark. That's what we're talking about right here. It literally says right here that the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat, which is in Turkey. For thousands of years, people have believed this biblical account, but the thing is, nobody's actually found it until recently. We might have. It didn't matter that nobody had found it for thousands and thousands of years. Everybody just believed it was there. Back in the days before science and archaeology and everything was huge, everybody just had blind faith. Locals from the area of Mount Ararat have said that they constantly find like wooden remains, stuff that probably was part of that great wooden ark, but that doesn't prove anything. There have constantly been hoaxes about actually finding this thing. The most promising of all the old findings and sightings is the Darupanar site. This is a massive 538-foot formation of limonite, or however you pronounce that was in eastern Anatolia or Turkey. That's the same area of the Mount Ararat mountains. Tons of people believe that this is literally just the ark, but it's formed over by the earth's processes over those thousands and thousands of years. Actually, the Islamic faith itself in the Quran states that Al-Qudi, or this mountain right here, this formation, is where the ark is. There are these stones called the Arzab stones that were found near this site that people believe were literally just weights, like anchors for the giant ark in the rough seas. They all have holes cut in the tops of them, which would be perfect for a rope to go through to, hold down a boat as an anchor. The ancient Babylonian story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, has its own accounting of this great flood. It says that stones just like this were used to hold some sort of ark steady in the water. I could yap about this entry for an entire video, but I'm gonna stop right here because that's basically all you need to know. Nobody really knows where the ark was. They just don't. There's been no concrete evidence of it being found or it even being real, as sad as that is to say because I am a Christian, but that is what it is. The Turkish authorities actually forbid excavation in these areas of Mount Ararat, so honestly, we might not ever find it until something changes over there. It's pretty sad if you ask me. The unfinished obelisk. If you aren't familiar with what an obelisk is, it's basically a four-sided rectangular tall pillar with a pyramid on top. It's some sort of ancient monument type thing. These were very common in ancient Egypt, most of the time used to signify worship of some of their gods. I think most of the time it was actually the sun god Ra that this symbolized. Now this unfinished obelisk is an obelisk that was found still in its quarry, obviously unfinished, in Aswan, Egypt. Its creation was probably ordered by Hatshepsut, who was the ruler of Egypt in like 1500 BC or so. Here's the thing, this thing was huge. The tallest Egyptian obelisk ever is known as the Lateran obelisk, and it was 150 feet tall. This one was 137 feet tall, or it would have been. The difference comes in the length and the width of the volume equation. This thing is so big that it would have weighed around 1,200 tons. The other one, that Lateran, only weighs like 455 tons. That's a big difference. They started carving this thing out of literal bedrock, and eventually it started cracking, which is why they just abandoned it. This thing would have been awesome though. Hatshepsut was a female pharaoh with a really cool story. She literally took control of Egypt as a pharaoh, as a woman, by dressing as a man. This is some Mulan type stuff. It would have been awesome if this largest obelisk ever would have been erected by a woman who was infiltrating the male role of pharaoh. She was breaking societal norms way back then. It was really cool to see. Now, because this thing was unfinished, you could literally see where these workers were working on it. You could see how they did stuff. It provides a glimpse into their stoneworking techniques and stuff like that we just didn't have any clue about before. If this thing would have actually been completed, I know that it would have been studied like the pyramids and the Sphinx and all that good stuff because it's just awesome. What exactly does Sela mean? Sela is a word used in the Hebrew Bible 74 times, most of the time in Psalms. The crazy thing about this word is that not even ancient biblical scholars knew what this word meant in these contexts. There's lots of theories about it, but none of them are concrete because we just don't know. We don't go that far back. Because it's used so many times in Psalms, it's probably something to do with music. Some think that in this musical context, it might mean to stop and listen, or to pause, or to wait, something like that. or to lift up. There's tons of musical interpretations. It's commonly seen as being said before a new paragraph, so it might be something like that, like pause or to lift up before you sing the next verse. Some scholars believe that it was actually an instruction for the ancient musicians of the ancient temples to actually follow. Like they knew what it meant, but we don't. That's really all we know about it. It probably is used in this musical context, but we just don't know what it means for sure. Kanye West might though, because he uses it as the title of one of his songs. Ye says that it means to look back and reflect upon, so obviously that's what it means, right? We have to go with Kanye's word. He's right about everything. No, but seriously, that's all I know about it. That's pretty much all I could find on the internet. So if you know something that I don't know, tell me about it. The Babylonian map of the world. As the name implies, this is literally the earliest known map of the ancient world. It was Babylonian. It was written in cuneiform in around the 7th or 8th century BC. As most ancient societies did, the ancient Babylonians believed that Babylon was the center of the known world. This clay tablet map shows Babylon as the center with all the outer lands around it. It shows the Euphrates River, the sea, everything that was known to the people back then, but also mythological lands. It depicts a bunch of mythological beasts that were supposedly present in the ancient Babylonian religion or mythos. It talks about how the world was created by Marduk, who was their god. It talks about these different beasts that were exiled to the sea, a bunch of good stuff like that. Really juicy, actually. The funniest thing about this map is that these people definitely knew who the Persians and Egyptians were. Like, I think they traded with them back then. They purposefully excluded them from this map because Babylon was the center of the world. These people were the main character of their own story. In general, it's pretty cool because this thing conflates mythology with reality. So there's literal actual Babylon and there's mythological lands that may or may not exist. There's beasts, there's all this crazy stuff, but that's how they viewed the world. Viewed, not viewed. That's not a word. They viewed the world as their mythology. What they believed was true in their minds. And I guess the same can be said for all the different religions of the time. Like the ancient Egyptians believed that Ra was the sun god. We just talked about that obelisk thing. Nowadays, we just call this mythology, but back then, that was the reality for them. That's something that we don't think about today, even though it may be going on. I'm a Christian, so I truly do believe that Jesus was the Son of God and God created the world, all that kind of stuff. But honestly, I could be in the same boat as these people. My reality is everything that went on in the Christian faith, especially the New Testament. Reality for these people is that Marduk created the world and the Epic of Gilgamesh was real and all these mythological beasts were real. Thousands of years down the line, people may look back at us as Christians and, you know, Islamic people and Jewish people, everybody, and say that we were in the same boat as them. We just didn't realize it. That's kind of mind-blowing to me, and the fact that I get to even contemplate this kind of stuff by talking about random things in ancient Babylon is crazy. How did the ancient Sumerians know so much about our solar system? All right, we've been talking about the ancient Mesopotamians this entire time. So the ancient Sumerians started in around 5500 BC in Mesopotamia. There you go. So how did they know so much about our solar system? Well, first you got to know what they did know about our solar system, right? They knew that there were 10 planets in our solar system. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that there's Mercury, Earth, Mars, Venus, Uranus, Neptune, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, if you consider that a planet, right? That's 9. And there's no more. But they thought there was. There was an ancient planet called Tiamat that was destroyed and turned into our asteroid belt. Now, is that true? I don't know. But here's the thing. We didn't know that Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto even existed until 300 years ago. So how did these people know about it 5,000 years, 7,000, however many thousand years ago that was? Did these people have crazy high-powered telescopes way back then? Probably not, because we didn't find anything that closely resembled that at all. We do know that the ancient Sumerians were very advanced. They had the Hammurabi Code, they had different tools, they had crazy stuff back then, but a telescope, I mean, come on. Say what you want to about them, but they literally did build ziggurats as observatories. They had a lunar calendar. They tracked celestial bodies in catalogs. They really did. They were crazy. They're definitely a lot smarter than I am if you want to know the truth about it. Now, let's circle back to that mythical planet that supposedly existed way back when. Could it be that it exploded and became our asteroid belt? It's off the wall, but possibly. See, if this thing exploded into a bunch of asteroids and just celestial mass flying everywhere, it would have crashed into the planets. It would have crashed into moons. Some of it would have formed a gravitational belt like the asteroid belt. So yeah, it could have happened. There are giant craters on some of the planets, and this really would explain it. There's lots of meteors moving around our solar system to this day, while some of them probably would have disintegrated by now, but it's kind of crazy. This stuff could be true, and how these people knew about it, we just don't know. Through all the research that I've done, and pretty much everybody else has done, nobody knows how they knew so much about our solar system, possibly more than we even know today. It almost makes you think that there was some sort of ancient civilization that was very advanced and knew more than we know today. But That's just me being a conspiracy theorist. The Muqatat. I'm definitely saying that wrong. Whatever that word is, it means mysterious letters at the beginnings of several different chapters in the Quran. At the beginnings of 29 of the 114 chapters of the Islamic book, the Quran, there are literally disjointed letters that mean absolutely nothing that we know about at the start of the chapter. Now, it probably did mean something way back when the book was written, but this has kind of been lost in translation, literally. There are a bunch of them that are interpreted to be names for God or something like that. Now, I'm going to read a few of these, but they don't make sense to me anyway because I don't understand the Arabic language, anything like that, and you probably don't either, but here's some of them. Alif, Lam, Mim, Alif, Lam, Ra, Alif, Lam, Mim, Ra, and there's just a whole bunch of them. I'm not going to keep doing this because it's just going to get old, but still, nobody knows what these mean. They're not real words. Some theories say that they introduce some sort of rhyme that's supposed to be part of a spell or something supernatural. Some say that they could be divine codes or abbreviations for something that's actually important, or just mysterious codes that we're supposed to decipher or something like that, but who knows? Some scholars have even tried to make these mathematical, like make them mean something numerically, but they just really don't. This is one of those things that might be solved by AI, but I'm really not hopeful for it. There are lots of mysteries kind of like this in the Quran, and most of them are just not going to be solved probably ever. If you know more about the Quran and about these disjointed letters, you should let me know because I really have no idea. It makes no sense to me. The Heslington brain. The Heslington brain is a 2,600-year-old human brain preserved in its skull in England. More specifically, Heslington in Yorkshire in England. This thing is thought to be the most well-preserved brain of all time. To make the story behind this brain short, what we know is that this guy was probably hanged and then decapitated, and then just his skull was buried there in Heslington. We never found his actual body. This guy was probably around 30 years old, and he was probably some sort of ritual sacrifice if we had to guess. Now, this thing wasn't actually found until 2008. The area that it was found in had been the subject of many excavations and archaeological digs because there were ritualistic objects and stuff like that found buried in the area. Like, something they found pretty close to this body was the headless body of a red deer, so they were decapitating everything out here apparently. Now, why this brain was so well preserved has to do with the fact that it was decapitated from the rest of the body, so it didn't decompose as quickly. One thing that makes bodies decompose so quickly is the bacteria from the gut that is just eating its way out of the dead body whenever the person dies. The fact that there was none of this and it was literally just the skull and what was remaining in it, you know, the brain, none of that extra decomposition happened. It was just the skull buried in that dirt right there, and it was just well preserved. The soil that the head was found in had almost a complete lack of oxygen, so it didn't have anything in there to actually decompose it. It was more like waterlogged soil that was just kind of like a marsh. If you heard me talk about bodies that are found in like peat bogs and stuff like that called bog bodies, bodies are very well preserved in there because of the lack of nutrients and also the water levels, all that good stuff. That environment is very conducive to good preservation of decomposing bodies. So I guess the takeaway from this is that if you happen to off somebody or, you know, something like that, don't bury the body in a swamp or in a bog because they will find it. Also, there are certain biological functions that happen whenever a body dies, besides just the bacteria eating its way out of the gut, that actually happen whenever, you know, the person dies, that this didn't happen to for this person because he was hanged and then immediately beheaded with a knife. So I guess in a way we got lucky because we get to study this decapitated head and this brain. It was very well preserved, but the poor guy, he had it rough. He was hanged and then, you know, decapitated. So that's just unfortunate. What did Pope Leo say to Attila the Hun? So if you don't know somehow, Attila the Hun was basically the leader of the Huns and also the leader of the empire that the Huns led. It wasn't a massive empire or anything like that. It was more of like a coalition between Germanic tribes of the time. Now, he went on an absolute reign of terror. He was conquering everything and he eventually invaded Italy. He did this in the year 452, and upon that, the actual emperor of Rome sent Pope Leo and two others as envoys to try to, you know, negotiate peace with this guy. Legend has it that as soon as Attila started talking to this guy Pope Leo, he was incredibly impressed. For some reason, he decided to completely back off of Rome for good. The actual dialogue of what this guy Pope Leo said to Attila is completely lost to history. We have no idea what he said, but somehow it apparently caused him to completely back off, and he was on a reign of terror. He was gonna conquer Rome. I mean, he just was. Rome had already been sacked previously by Alaric of the Visigoths, so it was gonna happen. There's some conflicting opinions out there that say that it wasn't just what Pope Leo said that caused the dude to back off. First of all, some say that Attila's men came to Attila and told him that he needed to back off because he was gonna die like Alaric did. Alaric invaded Rome and then like a year later he died. They didn't want that to happen to their leader Attila. Little did they know Attila would actually die in the year after that in 453 anyway, but you know, it happens. Now, the other theory is that there are actual appearances of biblical saints with like massive swords and just armor, all that good stuff that appeared beside Pope Leo, and that's what scared Attila. They theorized that Rome was literally being divinely protected. Now, I don't believe this at all because there's just no writing of this in scripture, no writing of anything like this happening, especially after the time of miracles passed. I really don't know what happened. Maybe Attila did see visions of saints, but they weren't actually real. They were just in his mind because Pope Leo said something that was so scary to him, like that there was going to be divine protection, that he tricked himself into thinking it was actually there. I don't know. Now, I don't know, but you might know because you're probably smarter than me. It doesn't take much. I think the best way to start this one is to start with the lost city of the Kalahari. This is just as it sounds. It's the ancient ruins of a lost city in the Kalahari Desert in Africa. If you don't know your African geography too well, the Kalahari Desert is a desert in the southern part of Africa, like in South Africa and a few more countries down there. It's been estimated that this desert spans over 360,000 square miles down there, so that's pretty big. Now, for the city. The existence of this city was theorized by a man named William Leonard Hunt. Now, William Leonard Hunt was kind of a circus entertainer. He was a daredevil, tightrope walker, stuff like that. He was the first white man that crossed the Kalahari Desert on foot. So this guy crossed the desert and then he was going back on his way up north back to Europe, right? On his return trip, he saw some rock formations that he theorized made up a lost city, like an ancient city. By the way, he went by the pseudonym Guillermo Farini, so if I refer to him as that, that's why. Now, when this guy found these rocks and these stones, they looked like they were expertly carved by a mason. As a result, he wrote down in his little notebook that he thought that this could be the remains of a city or a worship place or something like that. This was in the late 1800s, and since then, there's been over 30 expeditions to find this spot and all this stuff that he saw and wrote about. Nothing has really been discovered since. If you didn't know, Elon Musk himself is South African, and his grandfather actually led some of these expeditions looking for this stuff. It's really a small world. Now, in 1964, this guy named A.J. Clement went on his own expedition down there to try to retrace Farini's true route that he took. Whenever he did this, he stumbled upon some giant stones that were probably what dude was talking about. They were monumental rocks that kind of resemble walls, sort of like the Great Wall of China. He took pictures of this stuff, and everybody that's looked at these pictures so far pretty much thinks that this Farini guy just thought that these giant blocks were building blocks of an ancient city when they're really just rocks. It turns out they are weathered dolerite, which is a type of rock, type of mineral. Apparently, these formations date back 180 million years or something like that. So while there could have been a lost city in Kalahari in that desert, I mean, it's 360,000 square miles and it's hard to travel because it's an average temperature of like 110 degrees. We really don't know. Like every single lost city mystery that we talk about on this channel, there's no proof that any of this ever actually existed. Except Atlantis. The mystery of the mummy from KV-55. KV-55 is a tomb found in the Valley of Kings in Egypt, which is where a bunch of their pharaohs were buried. Now, KV-55 itself is a small tomb, but it has tons of historical evidence and stuff that links it back to the El Amarna family, which is like King Tut and Akhenaten and all of them. It's also got genetic evidence that links it to Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. Some of these say that it could be King Tut's father because obviously it's not going to be King Tut. We do have his mummy. The leading theory above all is that this mummy belongs to Akhenaten. Some of that genetic evidence also points to it being Tut's father, which has been long speculated that maybe he is his father. Maybe Akhenaten is King Tut's father. Here's the weird part about all of this. Whenever Akhenaten ruled over Egypt, he decided to change both the religion of Egypt and also the capital city. He changed the religion from that polytheistic Egyptian mythology that we always think about, like Ra and Horus and all of those other gods out there, to monotheism under the sun god or sun disk, Aten. It was pretty much Egypt's first attempt at monotheism. Now, as a result of him changing the religion, he decided to change his capital city of Egypt, which was Thebes, because it was highly entrenched in that religion. He decided to change it to a new site. That site was known as El Amarna. In El Amarna, he had his own tomb created for whenever he finally passed away. We have found that, so we know that his tomb is there. It's very likely that he was buried there. So, if he's buried there, then who is this in this K-55 KV55 that everybody thinks is also Akhenaten? Well, more than likely it's somebody in the family. We just don't know exactly who. There was another ruler within the family that was probably in between the time of Akhenaten and King Tut, but we really don't know. But anyway, his name was Smenkhare or something like that. He is the most likely culprit of who was in that tomb at KV55. I would say that it was Akhenaten, but it's most likely that he's over here in El Amarna buried. So it's got to be Smenkhare, right? Here's another weird thing about all this. We can't figure out exactly how old this person was. At first we thought the mummy was female, and then it went to a young male, and now it's a male up to like 60 years old. We really don't know. Further examinations of this mummy have gone down every like 10 years for a very long time. My personal opinion about this one is that it was probably this guy named Smenkhare, but there's one other scenario that's possible. It could be that Akhenaten was originally buried over here in El Amarna, and then eventually somebody decided to move his body from his resting place there to KV55 to be with the rest of his family over here in the Valley of Kings. We really just don't know. There are so many cryptic things about ancient Egypt that we will never know, probably because our science is just not that good. We weren't there. Until we get a time machine, who knows? The Gospel of Judas. This is one of my favorite entries on any iceberg I've ever covered. The Gospel of Judas is quite literally that. It's a Gospel of Judas in the same way that there were the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. We don't know who wrote it, but we do know that it was probably written around 280 AD or so. So actually it was written way after his life and death and way after the other books, so is it really real? Probably not. It's a Gnostic text. This book was quickly rejected as heresy by the early Christian church, and you're about to see why, but this thing was lost for 1700 years before it was found in Egypt again in 1970 or so. Alright, so what was in this thing and why was it rejected as heresy? Why was it so bad? Well, it portrayed Judas as a hero. According to this text, Judas was the closest of all of the 12 apostles to Jesus. He was his best friend, and Jesus trusted him to betray him to the Roman soldiers. He knew what was going to happen, so he let it happen and wanted it to happen. You see where this is heresy already, right? Besides this strange retelling of Judas' story as the hero, there were also some weird things incorporated in this text from Gnosticism. Basically, this text states that Jesus reigns from an eon called Barbello. Now, an eon is basically an emanation from the ultimate supreme being that is God, but it's not our God. It's weird. Anyway, this thing sent Jesus, which I guess that's not that far off from, you know, Christ being sent by God, but it's weird. Basically, this one book rewrites all of the New Testament, everything that we know about Jesus and salvation and literally everything. Just everything in Christianity, this challenges it. It's easy to see why this was considered heresy. I really don't believe that Judas was a good guy, was a good person at all. He literally did sell Christ for 30 pieces of silver in both stories. I don't think Jesus was in on that and wanted him to do that and was best friends with him. No, I just don't. That's up to interpretation for you, though. Do you think the Gospel of Judas should actually be included in the Gospels in the New Testament? Let me know what y'all think about this down below in the comments, because I have nobody else to talk to about this, so might as well talk to y'all, right? The Marcahuasi Ruins. The Marcahuasi Ruins are located in the Andes Mountains in Peru, and they supposedly contain vortexes of healing energies. Alright, so what exactly are these things? They're geological formations, so basically rocks that look like faces, animals, religious symbols, stuff like that. They're massive carvings in rocks. You can distinctly see something that looks like a human head. There's other stuff in there as well. This place was first investigated in 1922 and then later again in the 1950s by a guy named Daniel Russo. Alright, so as I said, this stuff is located in Peru in the Andes Mountains at a plateau that's about 4,000 meters above sea level. This rock is made out of granite for the most part. According to that guy Daniel Russo, who investigated in the 1950s, these ruins were carved by some ancient civilization that was kind of pre-Incan in the area. There are 3 specific faces in these ruins that are given names. There's the African Queen, the Egyptian Princess, and Taweret. All these names that link this site to like ancient Egypt and Africa are because these people literally believe that the ancient civilization that carved them is linked to ancient Egypt somehow. This pre-Incan civilization, according to these people, was named the Mazma. Apparently they could travel across the world, and that's why they were so linked with ancient Egypt. Where they got this idea, I really don't know, but apparently apparently they even made some kind of biblical link to the Masma people. So there's that for you. I think the Masma people themselves should be their own entry on this iceberg, honestly. Now, the Marcohuese ruins are also home to a lot of UFO sightings, so I think people are just a little bit crazy down there, maybe. Speaking of crazy, what was that deal about the healing energy down there? Well, apparently there's these vortexes at the ruins that contain this healing power. So what does that even mean? Well, apparently people that are deathly sick or have very bad injuries, stuff like that, can travel to these ruins, to these certain points, and they just magically get better. There's this funny story about this. There's this guy that was paralyzed in a car accident. He decided to hike up the mountain to this vortex, and miraculously he was healed and he could walk again. So how did this paralyzed guy hike up a mountain in the first place? Nobody knows. As my wife would say, I think these people are a little bit cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Vitrified forts. All right, so throughout the Bronze and Iron Ages, Europeans, specifically in the Scotland area, had these vitrified forts. So what does vitrified mean? Well, it means to convert something to a glass-like substance through heat exposure, most of the time burning something. These forts are found mostly in the Scotland area, and here's the thing, these things have no type of cement or mortar or anything to keep them together. They're stone forts that were literally melted together. Now, obviously, the first thought of archaeologists was that these things were burned by enemies, and that's just what remained. But here's the thing, several experiments were held to see if this was possible or exactly how this would be possible. Researchers built stone forts, and then they interlaced it with like timber and stuff so it would catch on fire all around and sort of try to create that melting effect that these vitrified forts have. They couldn't figure out how to do it. They got them hot enough, but all the forts that they tried collapsed. That suggests that it has to be a controlled burn, and they had to know exactly what they were doing. They would interlace these stone blocks with timber, but also with other combustible materials like peat moss and other stuff like that. And then around that, they would have sand, silt, clay, stuff like that that would kind of keep it together and not let it collapse down. Apparently this was a highly advanced construction method that we just really never would have even thought would be done. Because of that, some people still think that it might have been accidental, like they might not have actually known what they were doing, but they had blacksmith shops inside and stuff like that that just melted the walls, and it was kind of accidental, but it happened. But that's probably not the case. They basically were creating sandstone. This stuff is super tough, and once it's heated like that, it pretty much can't be burned down again. The Scottish people were apparently just on a different level construction wise, because over 70 of these forts have been found in Scotland, but very few have been found literally anywhere else in the world. There's a couple more in Europe, but that's it. These things are just awesome. The mystery of Dighton Rock. So Dighton Rock is a 40-ton boulder that was found in Massachusetts at the small settlement of Dighton, which is now Berkeley, Massachusetts. This massive rock has tons of carvings and engravings on it that date back to 1680 AD or before. It was found by an English colonist named John Danforth in that year, in 1680. Now, there are tons of theories about what these inscriptions are and who did it, but the most common and most likely scenario is one put forth by John Danforth himself. He says that it's most likely a Native American inscription that somebody left all those years ago. I'll put an image on screen now about what the inscriptions actually look like, but here's what he thought they were. He thought that it looked like visitors, probably English colonists or Spanish colonists or somebody, arrived on the coast, and then the Native Americans had a battle with them, and they just inscribed it on this rock. They wrote about it. Like I said, that's very possible and probable for what it was, but some people think that it doesn't actually mean anything at all, that people were just sketching stuff out. Some other theories put forth are that it could have been like Norse explorers, so basically Vikings that landed on that east coast over there and left a note for future generations, or even the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were obviously from Mesopotamia. They kind of emerged from the ancient Canaanites after the late Bronze Age collapse. It's said that they were seafarers and actually traveled everywhere, so it could be possible that they got there and rode on that rock, but probably not. I think I'm going to stick with the Native American theory, but you can let me know what you think down below. Alaric's lost treasure. King Alaric was the king of the Visigoths who decided to invade Rome in the year 410 AD. This was the first sacking of Rome during the imperial days, and it pretty much signified the end of the Western Roman Empire. At least it started it on its downfall. The Visigoths were sort of a coalition of Germanic peoples who banded together to kind of fight Rome, honestly. The thing about King Alaric and the Visigoths in general is that even in this sacking of Rome, they weren't dishonorable people. Yes, they did invade Rome and they took it for themselves, but they didn't like burn down the city. They didn't raze it. They didn't destroy the holy places, any of that. When they sacked the city, they did take a lot of treasure and gold and stuff like that. Now, after all this was over, Alaric and his men pulled back deeper into Italy. As they were marching across the country, he fell ill. He had fever and got really sick. It was probably malaria. Alaric passed away that year in 411 in Cosenza, Italy. Apparently, he was buried with all of his treasure under the riverbed of Busento, which is a tributary river in Italy. Burying somebody under the river was apparently part of the pagan practices of the Gothic people's religion. They literally blocked off the river, diverted it around where they were going to bury this guy, and then after they did that, they allowed the river to flow back over it. After they finished all this manual labor, they had the people that actually did it put to death. These people were most likely servants or slaves, but anyway, they put them to death, so nobody knew exactly where he and all his treasure was buried. So despite the fact that we know pretty much where he was buried, nobody has ever found this tomb. As a matter of fact, we don't even know exactly what the treasure consists of. Just real quick, I'll read you one resource and what it says the treasure consisted of. It says, imagine a treasure chest with 25 tons of pure gold, 150 tons of silver, precious jewelry, coins, artistic jewelry inside. Apparently, this was the priceless amount of treasure that Alaric gained from the sacking of Rome. Now, if that much is buried with him, how much did the rest of the Visigoth people have? Who knows? He might have actually kept it all. We really don't know. The moral of this story is you should get a metal detector and go search that entire river and try to find this stuff. That's honestly what I'm taking away from it. The Lady of the Spiked Throne. The Lady of the Spiked Throne is an ancient artifact from the Indus Valley civilization that dates all the way back to around 2700 BC. It looks really goofy. It literally looks like a boat made out of a cow. Inside this boat, there's this lady sitting on the spiked throne, and then there's her attendants in front of her. Both the lady and her crew have really weird features about them. Like they have elongated heads, they have weird eyes, it looks like they have beaks. It's really weird stuff. Now, this thing wasn't studied until like 2009 or something like that, but it was in private collections up until then. I really don't know the authenticity of this thing. Apparently, the guy that first studied it in the early 2000s did some like dating on it, carbon dating, other stuff like that, and determined that it is authentic, but then again, who knows if that's really true or not. It's also theorized by these people that this thing might not be a boat, it might be a chariot. We really don't know either way, but if it's a chariot, it would make more sense. If it is a chariot, it shows that supernatural link that the Hindu people have with like animals and inanimate objects like a cart. It ties all those Hindu traditions and beliefs about animals with the ones about supernatural carts that move, like their deities and supreme beings, stuff like that. So this lady in the spiked throne was probably somebody important, and this would be one of the earliest links between Hinduism and the Indus Valley civilization. If you didn't know, the Indus Valley civilization is in like modern day India, Pakistan area. It was way back then when like ancient Egypt was going on. That was when this was popular. Not popular, it was a civilization. This was when people were there. Now, in front of this lady on her spiked throne within the artifact, there's these rows of her crewmates. All these crew people are in alternating rows between male and female. The males have turbans and some sort of gown on, and the women are kind of like semi-naked, but they all have really weird facial features, like the eyes, the nose, everything's just a little bit off. There are some other reports from other archaeologists that studied the Indus Valley civilization that say that there are figures like this that were found to date all the way back to 2800 and 2700 BC in that time frame. So this really could be real. It could be an authentic thing. It's just kind of weird. Now, as to who this lady actually was, we also don't know. She's probably some sort of goddess or divine being, or maybe just a ruler. We just don't know. There's lots of political and religious symbolism within this thing, so if you're an expert on the Indus Valley civilization, let me know more about that. Krishna's Butterball. This is a fun one. Krishna's Butterball is a massive boulder resting on an incline in a town in India. I'm not even going to pretend that I can pronounce the name of the town because it's kind of long, but anyway, it's literally defying gravity. This boulder is 6 meters high by 5 meters wide and weighs 250 tons. It's inclined right now at an angle of 45 degrees. It's literally defying gravity. There's no good explanation for how this thing sits still, and it's been there for thousands of years. It's been there since at least 600 AD because that's the first recorded attempt at moving the stone, but nobody can actually move it still to this day. All right, so what's the deal with this name, Krishna's Butterball? Krishna was one of the supreme gods in Hinduism. Hinduism. According to the locals of the area and Hinduism in general, Krishna's favorite food was butter. So it was Krishna's favorite food, and as everybody says, it falls from the heavens because it was just so good. So they literally equate this boulder as a giant butter ball that fell down and is resting on this incline. There have been tornadoes, tsunamis, and earthquakes, but still nothing has moved this massive boulder. Now the best explanation that we have of this thing is that it's not actually round. Its center of gravity is actually higher up the incline, so it doesn't like roll down the hill. That plus the friction of it being on this other stone, on this stone incline, makes it not roll down, apparently. It might be a natural formation, or it might be something that somebody thousands of years ago created. We really don't know. I think this thing would be really cool to go and see. I've seen pictures of people like pushing on it, trying to move it and stuff, and they just can't. It's said that somebody actually tied 7 elephants to it and tried to move it like that, and they still couldn't move it. So that thing's pretty awesome. The Mehrgar Wheel Amulet. We're staying in the same general vicinity. This time we're in Pakistan. So Mehrgar is an archaeological site in Pakistan where they found this wheel amulet thing. This thing is basically an early copper spoked wheel or circular object, something like that. It was from the Indus Valley civilization once again. So there's several different reasons this thing's important. First of all, it dates back to like 5,000 to 6,000 BC, and it was probably a wheel or a circular object used like a wheel, so that's kind of crazy. It could have also been some sort of solar symbol, but I'm gonna go with the wheel. It was in Mehrgar, which was a farming community, so they would have needed wheels to do everything they did back then. I guess they didn't technically need them because most people didn't figure out about wheels until after this probably, but anyway. Now another important thing about this is it was created using a lost wax casting technique. This was one of the earliest techniques of metallurgy. First, a mold is made with wax. Then that wax is covered with clay and baked until it becomes hard like pottery. Within that hard mold, the melted metal, or copper in this case, would be poured into that mold and it would solidify into what it is now. As I said, this casting technique was very popular early on, transitioning from the Stone Age to the Copper and Bronze Ages. They used it to make stuff like this, but also tools and other artifacts. Now back to the whole wheel thing, the wheel wasn't officially invented until like 4500 BC, so this taking place in like 5000 BC means that these people were ahead of the curve. They weren't much ahead of the curve, but they were ahead of the curve. That is, if you assume this is a wheel and not some sort of solar object or something like that. Now, even if this thing did symbolize a wheel, it's not an actual wheel because it's pretty tiny. It's literally an amulet. That's why it's called the amulet. Still though, let me know what you think because I think it's really cool if the Indus Valley civilization had wheels before everybody else did. I think the best way to start this one off is with the underground city of Derinkuyu. Now, unlike a whole bunch of the other ancient cities that are mythological in nature like Atlantis, this one is completely real. It's not even that like legendary or mythological, it's just forgotten. Derinkuyu is an underground city located beneath the modern day Derinkuyu in Turkey. It goes as far down as 280 feet below the surface, which is crazy. It's big enough to have sheltered up to 20,000 people with their livestock. Now, it's not the only underground city located in this area of Turkey, but it's by far the biggest one. The city itself was carved into the soft volcanic rock underneath the surface of that area. It was probably carved by the Phrygian people in the 8th or 7th century BC. They carved every kind of room you can imagine into this place. They had apartments, stables, wine cellars, chapels, you name it. It's also believed that there's over 600 entrances to this city complex. That's a lot of doors. I guess it's technically kind of like a cave complex. It's also connected to another underground city known as Makli through a tunnel system that spans over 5 miles long. The Phrygian people obviously used this city because they're the ones who carved it, but people after that also did. It was used as a shelter location for the people of the Byzantine Empire during the Arab-Byzantine War. It goes on to be used by Christians of the same nature for like hundreds of years. The last time these things were practically used was in the year 1923 whenever the Christians of that area of the Ottoman Empire were expelled. Well, I don't know if it was Ottoman Empire, it may have just been Turkey, but still. The city was actually found in 1963 whenever a guy went into his house, opened the door, and saw an entrance to who knows what. He started exploring, and it's this whole tunnel system. They started going through the city and opened it up to the public, and now as of 2025, over half the city is accessible to tourists. So I guess if you want to go explore an ancient underground city, go to Turkey. Mysterious stone structures in Saudi Arabia. Now this entry refers to 400 stone structures found in Saudi Arabia. They date back thousands of years, and they actually look like gates from an aerial view. I'll throw a picture on screen here. Basically what they are stone walls. These structures range in size from pretty small to over 500 meters long, which is a lot. There are also structures in Saudi Arabia that look like kites and some that even look like wheels. The thing is, there's a bunch of lava fields in Saudi Arabia from like volcanoes that once erupted or something like that. Maybe not volcanoes that erupted, but lava was flowing and it solidified. Some of these structures date back to 7,000 years ago, and no, they weren't built by anybody. They were natural formations of solidified lava. lava. These things are also known as mustatils, which sounds really similar to Mustafar from Star Wars, right? I just looked into it because I suspected some kind of connection between like a Latin base word or something, because that's what most of our English words are, but I don't think that word's even English. But anyway, turns out it's just a coincidence. I guess George Lucas might have seen these mustatils and decided to name the lava magma planet Mustafar after these. I don't know. That's something that y'all might could help me out with. I don't know much. I just researched this stuff off the cuff. That's pretty much all I know about these things. There are also some stone circles in Saudi Arabia that are pretty neat, but they're really not worth talking about because it's really similar to this other stuff. Giraffe culture. Giraffe culture refers to an early Bronze Age civilization that was in south central Iran. It was kind of in between the ancient Elam civilization and the Indus Valley civilization. Its peak was in like the 3rd millennia BC. Alright, the truth about this is that nobody knows if it was truly a unique civilization or if it was part of kind of the Elam and the Indus Valley civilization, and just the artifacts that were found kind of meshed together. It probably was its own standalone civilization, but the hard facts about it are still up in the air. There are some certain mounds called the Konar Sandal Mounds that are said to be a part of this culture, and as archaeologists did digs and stuff, they found some pottery that probably related back to the Giraffe people. Tons and tons of artifacts have surfaced across the Middle Eastern area that probably were from the Giraffe culture, but they were looted from people obviously looting graves and burial mounds and everything like that. They used arsenic bronze alloys in their artifacts and stuff like that, so that's how everybody tells them apart from pretty much every other civilization. Every other civilization used a tin alloy. Because so many artifacts have been looted from this area, and this general area is on screen right here. I've probably shown it before now as well. But anyway, nobody knows exactly anything about these people other than the rough time period from when they were there. Everything has been spread out so far that we can't really learn anything about them. We don't even know what did them in, what happened to them. It was probably weather or something like that, or, you know, the late Bronze Age collapse, but there's really not that much evidence of this civilization at all. Where did Hannibal get his elephants from? I absolutely love this. Let me set the stage for you. The year is 218 BC and Rome is in a full-blown war with Carthage. Hannibal is a general from Carthage. He's pretty much their top general, and he decides to take a trek of elephants and men across the Alps to invade Rome, or at least to invade Italy. Somehow, some way, somewhere, he gets a bunch of elephants to trek with him across the Alps, and we don't know where they came from. It's important to note that there are two different types of elephants. There's Indian elephants or Asian elephants and African elephants. Now you would think because Carthage was on the tip of Africa that he would probably have African elephants, right? Well, you're probably wrong. African elephants are extremely hard to tame. As a result, everybody thinks that he probably had Indian elephants because they're smaller, but they're much easier to tame. So we tend to think it was Indian elephants. Where would he get Indian elephants from? They were probably not able to boat a bunch of elephants over from India because that just doesn't even make sense. How would that happen? They have to eat like 400 pounds of vegetation every day to live. So where are we at there? Well, let's look to the Atlas Mountains. This is a mountain range in Morocco and Algeria, and they had their own subspecies of African elephants that were smaller in stature like an Indian elephant. Therefore, they're probably easier to train. Now, these Atlas elephants have since died out because of different climate factors and everything like that. It's not a good thing at all. But anyway, that's probably what he had. Here's the evidence behind that theory. There's an ancient Carthaginian coin that exists with Hannibal's face on it, and behind him or beside him, something like that, there is a picture of an elephant with him because obviously he was famous for trekking his elephants across the Alps. This image of the elephant is an African elephant. It is not an Indian elephant. So these Atlas elephants, this subspecies, that's pretty much what it has to be. I personally think it would be much more like aura filling and just awe-inspiring because this guy was Hannibal. This guy's the one who almost took Rome and would have taken Rome if Rome didn't launch a counterattack across the Mediterranean. But anyway, I think it would have been awesome if he had full-size African elephants, but he probably didn't. The Dolmen of Antiquera. First off, we have to define a dolmen. If you're unaware, a dolmen is an ancient burial tomb consisting of two vertical rocks with one over it. So basically, it's two rocks standing up with one on top. These are ancient versions of burial tombs, and they're very common within like prehistoric civilizations. Now, these Dolmen of Antiquera are actually a group of these different dolmens that are declared like national monuments or international monuments, something like that, by UNESCO, who does all the seven wonders of the world type stuff. But anyway, it's in Antequera, which is in Spain. It's in Andalusia, Spain. So as I said, there's these three different cultural monuments that are part of this Dolmen of Antequera. There's the Dolmen of Minga, Dolmen of Vieira, and Tholos of El Romero. And also there's these two natural mountains that are included within this site. Now these dolmen were created around 5,000 years ago, so in like the Bronze Age. Now one of the cool things about these things are that they're built so that they align with the solstices, like the summer and winter solstice. Like all these other megalithic monuments like Stonehenge, they have a lot to do with the solstices and the sun. But they also align with this naturally occurring mountain that I mentioned. That's why they're all included in this Dolmen of Antequera. Now I'm going to throw some pictures on screen of some of this stuff, but the Minga Dolmen, which I'm looking at right now, is absolutely insane. Like there's literally beams holding up these rocks that are on top. It's so cool to look at. You need to look at this. It's also said that when these things were excavated in the 19th century, there were tons of bodies in there, so they actually were used as burial sites. I say bodies, I mean skeletons. These people were long gone. Now, as you look at some of these pictures, you got to realize that some of these stones weighed up to 180 tons. The heaviest rock in all of Stonehenge is 40 tons. This is insane architecture for an ancient civilization. Now we look at the Tholos of El Romero. A Tholos is also an ancient burial site, but it's more so attributed to like the Greek people. But here's this one in Spain. This thing is so cool. There are stacks and stacks and stacks of rocks along the walls and along the ceiling. It's little rocks, not like these massive megalithic stones. It's small rocks that make up this foundation of this building. There's a circular interior with these rocks just lining the walls. Now for these naturally occurring mountains that are part of this site, the most important one is the Peña de los Enamorados. I probably didn't say that right. My mom's actually a Spanish teacher, so she'd probably kick my tail for mispronouncing this. But anyway, there's lots of local folklore about this mountain, but the coolest thing about it to me is that in certain angles from certain areas, if you look at it, apparently it looks like an American Indian, which we all know that's a Native American. But anyway, these people from Spain were going over there to the West Indies or whatever and finding these Native American people, but that's what this mountain looked like to them. It looked like an American Indian. Please don't cancel me for saying that. The tomb of Imhotep. Imhotep was an absolutely legendary figure from ancient Egypt. He served as like the advisor, chancellor, right-hand man, and probably the inventor of the step pyramid that Djoser built in ancient Egypt. His time was in like 2700 BC or so during the Old Kingdom in Egypt. His legacy is amazing. As I said, we ascribe to him that he probably designed the step pyramid that King Djoser had built. He was also basically deified after his death. They said he was basically the greatest thing since sliced bread. I just looked it up and sliced bread wasn't technically invented until 1928. So technically he was the greatest thing since way before sliced bread. That's a stupid thing to even include in this video, but I am. So despite all of this legendary stuff, like this guy was even a high priest of the god Ra, who was like their sun god and one of their ultimate deities. Anyway, we have no idea where he was buried. He designed the tomb and the step pyramid of King Djoser, but where's his home? He lived longer than King Djoser. It's basically been proven by different stuff that was written on the tomb of King Djoser himself, and also other tablets that Djoser wrote to him. But anyway, we still don't know where it is. It's well documented that there's a bunch of tombs in the North Saqqara area of Egypt from this time period, so it's likely that his tomb might be there, or it could be somewhere close to King Djoser's himself. Imhotep was obviously part of the royal family, or at least like the elites of the time period, so having him being buried with the pyramid that he actually created and the king that he served would make perfect sense to me. But what do you think? Do you think he was in Saqqara with all these randoms from the time from the Old Kingdom, or was he over here? Who knows? I would love to know, because it's likely that this guy designed his own tomb and everything that he ever designed was amazing. Like that step pyramid literally transcends everything. It's just awesome engineering for the time. So honestly, I really want to find this. I probably never will myself, but maybe somebody will. I feel like I sound like a crackhead or something in this video. I've been having so much energy talking about random stuff. But anyway, let's go to the next one. The Samothrace Temple Complex. This is a Greek temple complex or sanctuary to the great gods. It was located on the island Samothrace, which is in the Thrace region of Greece. This complex was associated with the mystery religion. So like think ancient Greek religion that doesn't really make any sense to us. It was secretive, stuff like that. There's some of the normal Greek gods associated with this religion, but the most important one of all is the Great Mother Goddess. Now, obviously, we know of Great Mother Goddesses from other religions, from other cultures, and this one kind of identifies with that. She is the same across many different ancient religions. So this sanctuary was this mystery religion, but what was the deal with the religion and the actual people that practiced it? Well, they were a cult. As I said, they dedicated the main part of their worship to this Great Mother Goddess and some of the other Greek gods as well, but they they weren't really Greek gods, they were Greek goddesses. It was like Nike and Hecate and Demeter, which they also associated with that great mother goddess. And there were several more too. Now this place is absolutely ancient. It's mentioned by both Plato and Homer in their works. So obviously it was before like 800 BC or so because, you know, Homer was in there somewhere. But anyway, it was created way before then. These ancient people held secret rituals and initiations to this secret cult society thing. The Greek historian Herodotus, the Spartan leader Lysander, and several other Greek people that we know about in history were initiates of this cult. Despite that fact, these ruins are not in good shape and we still don't know much about any of it. So some of these rituals probably involve some sort of sacrifice, hopefully not human sacrifice, but could be. There's this sanctuary in the temple complex where there was obviously sacrifices and we don't know if it was human or not, but I don't know. These people were weird. That's pretty much all I have for this one. This thing is awesome, but we just don't know that much about it because it's so ancient that we don't have that many records of it. Mysterious graffiti in Pompeii. Alright, so long story short, over 11,000 samples of graffiti have been found on the walls of Pompeii. This was a common thing during the Roman days as much as it is now, I guess. There was a lot of political propaganda, crude jokes, phallic symbols, pretty much the stuff you see to this day. The weird thing about some of this stuff in Pompeii is that it's really mysterious and we don't know what it means like at all. Some of this stuff is most likely linked to some unknown cults from the ancient Roman days. There's also some graffiti in a language that we thought was pretty much lost to time, Safaitic. This is an ancient Semitic script which is linked with like Old Arabic. Now why were people writing in this script in Pompeii? We may never know. Here's what we do know about it. The people that would have been using this during this time frame used it in like Saudi Arabia, Syria area. It's very rarely found outside of that area. So what's it doing in Pompeii? Well, in the same places where this Safaitic graffiti is, there are these random drawings of animals and gladiators, random stuff that was normal in everyday Roman life. So here's the takeaway from this graffiti. Researchers believe that the people that created this graffiti and wrote these phrases out on the walls were actually legionnaires from that nomadic population from like Syria, the Saudi Arabia area. Now, what were they doing here? Well, they might have been contacted by the Roman armies and then come to work for them as legionnaires. They were definitely there because no Roman citizen knew this stuff pretty much. There was so much graffiti in this script that it paints a picture of these people's stories, and it's most likely two of them at the very least. There's no way to know for sure, but that's probably what it was. The mystery of the headless Romans in York. Alright, so this is literally a burial ground of headless Romans in York, England. Around the years 2004 and 2005, they started doing some digging. Whenever they did this digging, they found over 80 bodies of headless Romans. Technically, only about half of these bodies were decapitated, but still, that's crazy. These Romans were probably buried here because during that time period, during the 2nd and 3rd century AD, this place was a Roman burial ground. York was once a provincial capital for Rome, so it was like the furthest north version of this. Almost all of these bodies had tons of scars across their bodies, so they led rough lives. They also ate foreign diets. Researchers can tell this by looking into like the isotopes and minerals, elements and stuff that are in their bones and their remains. Most of these men were European. Some of them were from like the Balkans, some from France, some from Germany, but some were also from the Mediterranean, which, you know, Romans. Now there's several different explanations as to who these men actually were. The first theory, and the one that I like the most, is that they were like gladiators or executed criminals that had to go through trials and stuff that ended to their heads being decapitated. Why else would they end up like that? Now the other main explanation is that they were Roman soldiers who actually died and their compatriots, their friends, retrieved their bodies and their heads and buried them. The only real proof that either side can offer is that on one skeleton there was a massive bite taken out of a bone. It looked like a carnivore bite, like a big bear or lion or something. If that was the case, they were probably gladiators. That would just make the most sense. Even if they were gladiators, that doesn't completely explain why they were decapitated. That's just weird. But the headless Romans, that's pretty cool. Thassos murder mystery. This is just as it sounds. On the Greek island of Thassos, archaeologists found a mass grave of 57 people. Now normally that's fine. That's not out of the ordinary. A bunch of people died and they were all buried. It was so long ago that nobody knows that it was on the same day or anything like that. But there's a catch. One specific skeleton caught the eye of these researchers. There was a perfectly circular hole in the chest sternum area of one of these skeletons. Now originally they thought that it was a birth defect because there is a birth defect where there's like an underdeveloped sternum with like a hole, and that's what it looks like. But it was a little bit too precise. Now they believe it was caused by the end of a spear. Now it's important to note that this skeleton, this guy was probably around 50 years old and he was in really good physical shape, which is not out of the ordinary. The Greeks value physical fitness, especially the people on this island. That is where the Olympics come from, after all. Not Thassos itself, but the Olympics in in general are Greek. It's Olympics, Olympus, you get it? Now, a whole bunch of research has gone into this, and they've pretty much concluded that he was most likely stabbed. Now, some of that research I mentioned also delved into his diet and what he was eating before he died. His diet got a lot worse. He got in worse health. He was most likely a prisoner, and his rations were cut, or they were just crappy rations in general. The fact that he's buried with 56 other people means that it was probably some sort of execution that happened on him, because that's where they buried prisoners or something like that. That's the best we have. I don't really know. As for the other 56, nothing looks out of the ordinary for them. They're just dead bodies. It could have been something else that we don't even know about, like something linked to an ancient plague or something like that. The fact of the matter is, we really don't know. We're gonna start this one off with the Abakan Palace ruins. This is an ancient Chinese style palace that was found in the Abakan region of Russia. Now basically this means that back all the way in the Han Dynasty, so like 2,000 years ago or more, there were Chinese people in this area before it became, you know, Siberia and the USSR, Russia area, territory, stuff like that. Alright, here's the thing. This area was hundreds of miles away from actual Chinese territory, and it belonged to their arch enemies, the Xiongnu, at the time. Now we talked about the Xiongnu in a previous video, but basically these people were horse archers that were the arch enemy of China, because they were coming in, they would bring all their thousands and thousands of horse archers, and you know, that's basically why they ended up building the Great Wall of China, to stop the Xiongnu invasions, at least parts of it. So why were they building these palaces in enemy territory? The palace was pretty big. It had 20 rooms and a hall, and it was made out of mud for some reason. I guess that's how they built stuff back then, like the side walls were made of mud. Now this palace had Chinese style roof tiles that actually had inscriptions on them. These inscriptions were obviously from the Han Dynasty, because it wasn't stuff that anybody in like the Xiongnu Empire would have written down, because it was praising the Han Emperor and stuff like that. Archaeologists found tons of ancient Chinese like artifacts, like jade stuff, gold stuff, basically everything that the ancient Chinese of that time had. Here's where the speculation comes in as to who actually built this. The Russian scholars and stuff that actually found this place speculated that it was an ancient general named Li Ling. This guy was most likely defeated by the Xiongnu and then defected to them as a result. Like maybe they made him join them so he didn't get killed or something like that. All his men didn't get killed. He led a force of 30,000 Han Dynasty troops into Xiongnu territory, and only 400 of them returned back after that whole fight and skirmish, whatever, and he was not one of them. Ancient rumor has it that he defected to the Xiongnu, and this would make sense. Basically, the story behind what happened would be that he got captured by the Xiongnu people over here and was held captive. 400 of his men go back, and then rumors spread that he was a defector. He wasn't actually a defector, but the Chinese emperor of the time thought that he was, so he tortured his family, and then word got back to the Xiongnu people that he had been having his family tortured. They told him, and as a result, he actually did defect. When he defected, he taught the Xiongnu troops how to fight the Han Dynasty, and it was actually really good for them, and it would make sense as to how this palace was built. That might be a totally tall tale, but who really knows, because it's really a cool story. The White Lady of Brandberg. The White Lady of Brandberg is a rock art painting located in Namibia, which is a country in southern Africa. It's located within Brandberg Mountain, which is more like a rock overhang. It's not like a full-size mountain for the most part, but anyway, that's where it is. It basically shows a white lady surrounded by darker figures, maybe hunters. Around the hunters, there's also some oryxes painted on there, which are basically like a species of antelope. Now, this painting dates back to around 2,000 years ago from ancient like sand art, which is a type of art in Africa. Alright, so this white lady is probably not a white lady in the way you would think it was. Like in southern Africa, there's not that many white people, or at least there weren't back then. A bunch of people obviously speculated that this was a white lady foreign visitor that came, and they painted about her because it was rare to see a white person there. That's probably not what it was. It's most likely a shaman wearing white garments or something like that. It's also probably not even a lady. It's probably a dude. Most likely this was a shaman wearing body paint or some sort of white garments, but they were doing some sort of ritual with these oryxes and these hunters. In this Brandberg Mountain overhang type thing, there's like 45,000 paintings, so this is just one of them, but anyway, this was probably the most famous of all of them. Nobody knows exactly what this thing represents because it was 2,000 years ago in southern Africa, and nobody really knows anything about that, but anyway, it's pretty cool to look at. Qin Zui. This was a Chinese noblewoman that was preserved as a mummy that dates all the way back to like the 200 1200 BC era from like the Han dynasty. She's one of the best preserved mummies ever. She was married to a very prominent guy, a marquis and a chancellor of somewhere in that area. I don't really understand how Chinese political titles work, but anyway, she was a noble woman. She had money. All right, so I said that her mummy was well preserved. It was so well preserved that her hair and her blood is still there, which is insane. It's been over 2,000 years. Her mummy was found in 1971 on accident, but they found her massive tomb, and her massive tomb was absolutely full of stuff. It had wooden figures, it had tons of makeup, it had just other artifacts that you wouldn't even think would be there. Like, it just, oh, she was rich. It's said that her skin remained as soft as it was in life. Like, it is literally just the same as it was whenever she was buried. Her ligaments still bend. It's crazy. I don't even know how they preserved her that well. I don't think we could do that again if we tried. She was so well preserved that they went into her veins and found her blood, and they found blood clots. They found that her cause of death was a heart attack, and that was 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years. That's crazy. She also had other stuff wrong with her. She had gallstones, she had high blood pressure, she even had a liver disease, so it was rough, but still, that's just wow. They found 138 undigested melon seeds in her stomach, so the last thing she ate was a melon. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always been told don't eat the seeds of a watermelon, so maybe that killed her. I mean, it probably didn't, but anyway. All right, so here's pretty much how she was preserved so well. She was literally Russian nesting dolled. Her body was buried within a wooden coffin. Then that wooden coffin was buried in another wooden coffin. Then that one was buried in another wooden coffin. And finally, it was buried in one more bigger wood coffin. There were layers to this to keep the oxygen and the moisture and everything else out. They pumped some sort of unknown liquid into that box with her body so that it would keep it moist and all that other kind of stuff. It had traces of magnesium in it, but we really don't know what it was. Now, her body did start to decompose as soon as we unsealed this mummy because oxygen got to it and stuff like that. So it's damaged a little bit now, but the fact that it was so well preserved, it's still better than most every other mummy ever, still to this day. So that's something. That's such a cool story, and I love this. Chinese Jade Bee. All right, so these Jade Bee are circular discs that were found in ancient China back during like the Neolithic period forward. That's like 3400 BC or so. These are decorative ornamental discs that were buried mostly with aristocrats. Now, because they're made out of jade, which is a very, very hard green stone that's very hard to work with, it's kind of confusing as to why they would do this in the first place. Their actual purpose back then is unknown to us, but they most likely symbolize like cosmological stuff or like wealth, something like that. Because of all the complication and all the expense that goes into making these things, it's thought that they might have been used in rituals during like the Liangzhu culture. The Liangzhu culture is kind of crazy. It's almost like they were an advanced civilization all the way back to like 5,000 years ago, whenever they were. All right, so here's how we find these things in these graves, and this might explain a little bit more to you. In these graves of these Chinese aristocrats, these jade discs are found above their heads, on their chests, and below their feet. There's got to be some sort of ritual to go to the afterlife or to guide them into the afterlife or to prevent the decomposition of their flesh or something like that. These discs basically encompass their whole bodies, you know, because it's above their head all the way to below their feet. We'll probably never actually know what they were used for, but they're really cool and really unique. These things were made with extremely complicated craftsmanship, like stuff that they shouldn't have even had all the way back then. Some of them even represent like scenes of dragons and just starry scenes, stuff like that. It's really cool stuff. We might not ever know the true purpose and the true reason behind them creating these discs, but they're pretty cool to study. Saudi Arabia camel carvings. In the northern part of Saudi Arabia, researchers have found 21 massive life-size camel statues, more like camel carvings, in the rock. These things date all the way back to 8,000 years ago, so like way before Stonehenge even. Alright, so there's 21 carvings, but only about a dozen or so represent actual camels, and there's some actual like horses or donkeys on there too. It's really cool stuff. Alright, so here's the speculation on how these carvings went down. They were carved using tools that were made of a stone named chert. This would have had to have been brought in from at least 9 miles away because there's no more chert anywhere in the area. As a matter of fact, it's speculated that these carvings were maybe made in like a nomadic tribe meeting place, so like a bunch of different tribes or something would come in and they would all camp there for a little while together and they would carve these. Each of these statues took 10 to 15 days a piece to make, so it's probably likely that it was a community effort, like everybody pitched in a little bit to carve this stuff. Some of these reliefs feature camels with like swollen bellies and other stuff related to fertility and pregnancy. So maybe these nomadic tribes met up together at this time of year to have their camels have their babies or something like that. Who knows? I think it'd be pretty cool if they all came together whenever the camels were about to calve or whatever you call it. I don't know if they're calves in camels, but anyway, if they wanted to take care of their camels together in this like hard season for their animals. That probably wasn't the case because people probably didn't actually have domestic camels back then. I don't think that happened until a lot longer than that after that, but who really knows? If they didn't have domestic camels, I don't really know why they would be carving camels, because that just doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, let's move on. Cima de los Huesos. All right, let's go to the archaeological site of Atapuerca, Spain. In this location, 29 sets of humanoid type bones were found that are designated now as the Cima de los Huesos. They call them hominins, which basically means like a pre-Neanderthal type humanoid species. These things supposedly date back to 430,000 years ago. This set of bones makes up 80% of the fossil record for humans or humanoid type stuff in the middle Pleistocene era, whatever you call that. There's over 7,000 bones there, including a bashed in human skull. There's DNA, there's a old stone hand axe, there's just all kinds of stuff. This site in Spain is like 100 feet below the surface. It's in like a cave complex. So quite literally, these people were cavemen. All right, here's a really funny part in this article I'm reading about these people. It says that these people were shorter, stockier, and smaller brained than normal humans. It says that they were like 5'7" and 170. So literally they are built just like me for real, especially the smaller brain part. There's one more part of this mystery to uncover. How did they get there? It may have just been a burial chamber. They may have just buried their dead in these caves or something like that. But there are a bunch of bones and fossils, stuff like that, from ancient animals of the time. There were bones from 175 bears found in this cave complex, as well as other smaller carnivores. There's a little bit of speculation that these people might have been thrown in there on purpose to be, eaten or sacrificed to these carnivores, to these bears, but there's not enough evidence to really back this up because they weren't eaten to death, like they weren't physically damaged by these carnivores most likely. Except for the guy with the bashed skull. I don't know what was going on there. One last thing on this one because I really just want to talk about it. That stone hand axe that they found down there with all these bones, they named it Excalibur. At least the researchers named it Excalibur, which is really cool because it's like King Arthur's sword's name and all that kind of stuff. I'm just a nerd for anything medieval, and Excalibur is definitely that. So anyway, Sri Lanka's Stargate. In the historic city of Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka, there is a star chart-like carving in the middle of a park. The park, known as Ranmasu Uyana, is a 40-acre park in the middle of this town. There are 3 Buddhist temples in this park that surround this area where this star chart-like thing is. Now, this chart is also known as the Universe Cycle carving in Sri Lanka, and it measures like 1.8 meters in diameter. Now, in front of this chart, there are 4 seats carved into the ground, basically, that are literally perfectly made for viewing this thing. This star chart is full of like concentric circles and horizontal and vertical lines. It's all divided up. It's really, really cool looking. Now, based on Buddhist traditions and just understanding of the people that probably carved this thing's most likely representative of the earth, the seas, outer space, and the universe as a whole. That's where all these online theories about it being a Stargate come from. A lot of people that are most likely fringe theorists, kind of like myself, just really think that this thing allows for interface between a human species and the aliens. Now, who these aliens are, we don't know. But yeah, it's like either a portal or something that humans can talk to aliens can come to our world from, or they can just talk to them through this somehow. I don't know. There's obviously no evidence to think that this thing would be an interface between humans and an alien species, but it could be. Who knows? Mustang's Caves. The Mustang Caves, or the Sky Caves of Nepal, are quite literally that. They're a collection of over 10,000 man-made caves high off the valley floor of Nepal in the Mustang district. We don't know exactly who carved these caves into the sides of these valleys, but we do know that there are partially mummified bodies in there that are up to 3,000 years old. There's also a lot of Buddhist artifacts and scrolls and stuff like that in there from like the 12th to 14th century, so like that's AD times. Now, this place was formerly known as the Kingdom of Lo. That was before Nepal itself annexed it in like the 18th century. That means that the people that carved these caves were probably the ancestors of the Kingdom of Lo's people. These caves actually have 3 different eras of occupation. So the first one was way back in the day, like 1000 BC or something like that. Way back then, they used it for human burials. About 1500 years later, from the 3rd century AD through the 8th century AD, they were using this for burials as well, but it was Buddhist sky burials. And then finally in the 10th century AD, they were using these caves as like actual occupation areas, like they were hiding from the government, stuff like that. Then and from then on is whenever all that Buddhist stuff was probably placed in there. From the looks of these Buddhist artifacts, it might have been used as like meditation chambers or something like that, because that would just make sense with Buddhist monks living in the area. To this day, these caves are legendary, especially to the people that live in the area, because it was their ancestors that carved them tens of thousands of years ago, or however long ago it was. At least 3,000 years ago, but people speculate that they were carved like 14,000 years ago. It would be awesome to go there and look at them myself, but that probably will never happen. But anyway, my Herpri was an ancient Egyptian noble that was probably of Nubian descent. This means that he was of Nubian origin, which is like southern Egypt and northern Sudan, that area, that region. The most important part is that he had dark skin. He was the only known Egyptian noble that was buried in the Valley of the Kings, which is like the royal necropolis. But anyway, he was the only one that had dark skin. He was buried in KV 36. His name literally translates to the Lion of the Battlefield. He had some more titles that we found in his tomb, like Child of the Nursery, and also Fan Bearer on the right side of the king, which is random. All this stuff leads to speculation that he might have been born in the royal nursery. He was part of like a exchange or something from Nubian nobles or something like that. He might have been a prince. He might have been from like a concubine wife of the pharaoh of the time, and he actually had darker skin because that concubine had darker skin. We really don't know. The fact that he had that fan bearer on the right side of the king title means that he probably served as like a vassal to the king or something like that. His mummy was very well preserved. It was found in 1901, and his face was so well preserved that whenever they found it, they saw that he just had like a peaceful expression on his face. It's the complete opposite of the screaming mummy, that's for sure. All right, so he had that Lion of the Battlefield title as well, which means that he might have been like a very powerful dude in the military, and this would make sense because ancient Egyptian pharaohs and stuff, they would recruit Nubian archers that were really good at that, I guess. And they also had some that served as fan bearers in their hieroglyphs that we see to this day and study. All this pretty much paints a picture of what this guy's life was like. We actually don't know how this guy died, because if we go in there and examine his body, it'll probably just disintegrate the mummy, so we haven't done that yet. But one of these days we'll find out how he died, if he was powerful in the military or something. We just don't know right now. I bet he definitely had an interesting story though, because all of this stuff it's pretty cool. Fuchun Lake underwater carvings. In 2006, researchers began an underwater investigation of Fuchun Lake in China. What they found was a massive group of huge buildings underneath the water. They found lots of big stones with very mysterious carvings. We might know where these buildings came from and who actually built them. Chinese legend says that there was an ancient city right here on top of this lake that eventually sank in there, but anyway, it was back during the Western Han Dynasty. This would have been somewhere between 200 BC and the start of the AD period. This city's recorded in the historical records up until like 500 AD, so it was there. It was known as Yuhuan City, and it sank to the bottom of this lake around that time. There were these carvings, but there were also tons of artifacts and just tons of stuff that symbolized this ancient civilization. I say ancient, it wasn't that long ago, I guess. This entire site of this lake covers somewhere between 2 and 3 square kilometers, which is a lot. Now, these carvings are just as the title of this entry says. They were very mysterious. Some of them seem to represent the sun and the moon. Some of them represent some sort of trigram symbol. Some of them represent like male and female genitalia, which is weird, but anyway. It said that one of these formations underneath this lake resemble an ancient pyramid, so they literally look like the Egyptian pyramids. I don't know how true that is or not, because this is Chinese studies, and China and information, they don't really crosswire, anyway. Because of that lack of information getting out, the information from China is just not that good. We don't know that much more about these carvings. I wish we did, and one day we probably will, but it might not be in our time, but here we are. The cult of Glycon. The cult of Glycon was an ancient Roman cult that worshipped a snake god known as Glycon. It was very prominent during the 2nd century, so think like the years 100 to 200 AD. Alright, so let's take it way back to ancient Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean in general. Going back thousands of years, there were always people that worshipped snake gods. In Macedonia in particular, there was an ancient snake cult that was kind of the predecessor to this cult of Glycon. They believed snakes had some ancient powers related to fertility and a whole bunch of weird stuff. This cult of Glycon was officially established by this guy named Alexander of Abonotikos. He was a Greek mystic and oracle and all that other weird stuff that went along with cult worship back in those days. Alright, here's the thing about this guy and this cult. Everything we know about this cult for the most part comes from a satirical writer known as Lucian. He basically said that this entire cult was a sham. Alexander was a false prophet, and this god of Glycon was just a hand puppet, literally a snake that would fit on your hand and, you know, hello guys, I'm Glycon the god. Here's a little bit of the doctrine that Alexander was pushing out for this false cult. There was a Greek hero and god of medicine known as Asclepius. Alexander said that this snake Glycon was quite literally a physical incarnation of this god. This guy Alexander was hyping up this rebirth of this god Asclepius as a new serpent or whatever, as a new god in the form of a goose egg cracking open and literally sprouting a new god. He had this goose egg at this public gathering, cracked it open, and a snake came out, and apparently this was, you know, the god Glycon, but really it was probably just a hand puppet. Just like those Macedonian people we talked about a little bit ago, this cult of Glycon mostly relied on this god and the worship of this god to improve their fertility. So basically it was desperate women and desperate people in general that couldn't have kids, that wanted to have kids, stuff like that. They were coming to this god to pray that maybe they could get pregnant or stuff like that. That has been a theme behind every cult basically ever. It's people that are desperate for something, and this cult leader are providing some sort of solution to these people. Think about Waco and Jim Jones and all of them. They were all kind of in the same boat there. A charismatic leader and a hope of something more. If y'all would like a dedicated video on cults, like a cult iceberg or something like that, I'd be very interested in doing something like that, so let me know down in the comments. Despite being so silly and just stupid in my opinion, this cult gained tons of followers, including Marcus Aurelius. Now, I don't know about you, but Marcus Aurelius, the guy that wrote Meditations, the ultimate Stoic philosophy, that just kind of blows my mind that he would buy into this stuff. But you never know what's going on in somebody's personal life, honestly. There were even coins minted with the image of this god Glycon, this snake god, which is kind of crazy to me. But then in the 3rd century, they just disappeared completely. Alexander died, and everybody just kind of fell off of that religion because it wasn't real in the first place. White powder mummies. That's not the actual name of this entry, but I can't say it out loud or else I'll get docked by YouTube. Alright, in the year 1976, there was a massive discovery regarding mummies and drug use. The first thing that was found were traces of like tobacco and stuff in this mummy's hair. That prompted a more in-depth study, which later turned up some more harder drugs. There was one main mummy that actually has a name that went along with this whole study. It was named Hinut Taui. I'm still not sure how to pronounce that. Anyway, this mummy is from somewhere between like 1000 BC to 300 BC, somewhere in there. We don't have the exact dating, but that's not the important part of this whole story. No matter how long ago that was, that challenges the thought that tobacco did not enter the Eurasian continent until like 1492 with Christopher Columbus. He got it from South America and brought it over there, and then everybody got hooked on that, and that was just a whole big thing. Obviously, that wasn't the case. Ancient Egyptians had it all the way back then, apparently. And it wasn't just tobacco and nicotine. They actually dissected this mummy's body and looked at it, and it had traces of white powder and cannabis and other stuff like that. Now, cannabis isn't that rare because they had it in like China along the Silk Road, but the other stuff, the white powder, is kind of crazy. This wasn't just a one-off discovery because obviously if you just have a sample size of one, that's not a very good sample. They went and studied 7 more mummies, and each and every one of them had traces of this nicotine and this white powder. How in the world would they have access to this if all this stuff originated in South America? Well, the general consensus is that these substances could have easily traveled through like merchant ships and gone along the way, and Egypt traded with everybody, so somehow this stuff got there. We don't know exactly how it got there, but it did get there, and this is not a fluke. It also could have been something to do with the fact that the people of Atlantis went on to establish both South America and Egypt, and they had this on their home place that sunk into the ocean, but that's probably not real. That's just me talking. That's what I think. Let me know what you think down below. The only actual explanation is that somehow these transoceanic voyages actually happened in the ancient world. That would explain why we have a bunch of anomalous maps that don't really make sense because they shouldn't have known things back then. That would also explain the fact that there were anomalous sweet potatoes found in the Polynesian islands. Like, they didn't have sweet potatoes. They originated in South America, and somehow they got to the Polynesian islands. Who really knows? Maybe they had some white powder and some tobacco and some sweet potatoes, and they went all over the world. Who really knows? The Long Pause. The Long Pause is a mysterious 1,000-year gap in the voyaging and colonization of the Polynesian islands. Alright, so the colonization of Polynesia was very fast, very rapid in Western Polynesia for a long time until all that was settled, and then in 800 BC, it all stopped. Around 1,000 to maybe even 1,500 years later, they started voyaging again and then settled the rest of Polynesia. But what was happening in that 1,000-year gap? We have to keep in mind that they were using Stone Age technology to move from island to island and to conquer them and to settle them. But what happened? Why did they stop? The first reason, it could have been something to do with climate change. The climate might have cooled down and the winds were terrible, made the oceans super hard to traverse, and that set them back 1,000 years. I find that hard to believe, because why would that happen for 1,000 years? That's crazy. The other fact of the matter is that going from Western Polynesia to Eastern Polynesia would take a lot longer of a voyage. Like, it would take a lot longer on a boat to get there. So maybe they had to take that time and develop more advanced technology, better boats, stuff like that. It could have also been something to do with their society collapsing for some reason or another, but we really don't know about that part. Here's the thing. Once they started going again, all of this stuff in like Eastern Polynesia that they hadn't ever been to before was colonized within 100 years. They were rapid at the beginning, then they took a massive break, and then they were rapid at the end. We may never know what happened in this 1,000-year time gap to stop them from settling all these different places, but they probably just had to get better boats. If you like thinking about and picturing this rapid expansion from Polynesian island to Polynesian island, you ought to watch Moana, because it's pretty cool. It's all about that journey with some fantastical elements, obviously, but still, this culture and these people are really cool, even portrayed by a Disney movie, and I'm not one for Disney movies. Pangxian Caves. The Pangxian Dadong Cave in southwestern China is a cave that has some really weird stuff going on. So this cave is located at 1,630 meters above sea level, and it has some really weird prehistoric animal bones in it. Specifically, it has lots of bones of rhinoceroses and stegodons. Now, stegodons are like prehistoric elephants. They're kind of really weird things, I guess. These bones supposedly date back to like 230,000 years ago, and the thing is, why would these land grazing animals, these big massive mammals, be together in caves? It's really weird. Now, all this stuff in this cave was discovered in like 1998, but to this day, we really have no concrete idea of how they got there. Now, once they got there, there was evidence that humans, or whoever in the human species was there at that time, did something to their bones, like they were using them for something. As to how they got there, it's really up in the air. They had lots of baby stegodons that they drug in there. We think that it could have been the humans that did that, but it's not the same for rhinoceroses. There were rhino bones of all different ages, of all different stages in their lives, so like adults and babies and everything. I don't know about you, but I personally couldn't take on a rhinoceros myself and drag it into a cave, and I don't know if these people could have either. They were using stone tools to carve out the bones and do really weird stuff with them, so we really just want to know, how did they do this? There is some evidence that there were humans in these caves during like the big ice age, so maybe these were in there at the same time, but I really don't think the timelines line up like that, so I don't know. The Gospel of Jesus's wife. All right, so long story short, there was an ancient piece of papyrus that was found in Coptic script where Jesus said, "my wife." This led to tons of speculation about literally everything that we thought we knew about Jesus, and I really don't know the truth about it, but we're going to read about it here. So in 2012, a Harvard professor named Karen L. King presented this papyrus to a conference in Rome. The piece of paper was obviously incomplete, but it literally does say, Jesus said, "my wife." Cue the Borat meme here. This piece of paper sparked a controversy, whether he was married to Mary Magdalene, or maybe he was referring to wives and mothers as his disciples, saying that they could also be his disciples, you know, as wives and mothers. They were sexual beings in nature, but they were still holy because they were, you know, followers of Christ. This piece of paper literally does say Mary, so everybody thinks like Mary Magdalene or whatever. Immediately, everybody started calling her out, saying this is fake, this is a fraud, this is a forgery. Even the Vatican newspaper says this. Now, the discussion around this thing falls in line with the Da Vinci Code about like a married Jesus and this whole crazy idea about Jesus's life and stuff like that. So Harvard and other laboratories analyzed this piece of paper with carbon dating and other imaging stuff like that, and they said that it literally was from that time. It probably is not a forgery. That doesn't mean that it's not fraud. It wasn't made by somebody that just wanted to put some fake news out there. If you're familiar with the concept of Gnosticism, it's very likely that this has something to do with that. Maybe this piece of paper was around then and it inspired all this crazy stuff that Gnosticism has. Now, we still don't know if this piece of paper was real, if it was actually written all the way back in the time of Jesus or whenever it was supposedly written, but we can guess that it probably wasn't. Even if it was written back then, it was probably some kind of false historian that wrote it or something like that. It just doesn't line up with anything in the Gospels, in the New Testament, in any of the extra books of the Bible, the non-canon books, literally nothing. So I'm going to guess that it was fake, but let me know what you think about it. The Mitla mosaics. Mitla is an archaeological site in Oaxaca, Mexico. I probably butchered that pronunciation, but it's okay. This was an ancient settlement of the Mesoamerican Zapotec people. They lived in this Oaxaca valley alone before other Mesoamerican people migrated down there to kind of meet them and intermingle with them. Now, these mosaics are intricate stone patterns that cover the walls of this archaeological site. These geometric designs called Grecas are unique to Mesoamerica, and they actually kind of model after Greek patterns, so it's kind of cool. Now, these mosaics are some of the most intricate designs that you will ever see, and they are on the inside and the outside of walls in this whole settlement, like every single building. Because of this, it's kind of speculated that maybe each different design means that different people could walk through different doors. It's kind of really weird stuff. Now, when I say these things are intricate, I mean they are literally precision cut, like to the millimeter. They're fit together as stone blocks or whatever, and literally there's no mortar. They are just that precise. It's crazy. The thing about these buildings is that these people had access to plaster because that's what the side of these walls and stuff was, but this stuff doesn't use that. They're literally intricately cut to be precision designs. It's wild. This settlement and these people were absolutely thriving until guess who comes in to ruin everything? The Spanish. The Spanish are absolutely the villains of this channel, and I absolutely cannot stand the ancient colonizers that were the Spanish, but I don't care about the modern day ones. They're just people, which I guess the old colonizers were too. They were doing what they thought was best. They were just being greedy and ruined a bunch of awesome culture. But anyway, these Mitla mosaics are amazing, and they're something that I think everybody should see at least on pictures once in their life. The Salzburg cube, also known as the Wolfseg iron. This is a small iron cube-like block that was once found by a coal miner in 1885, and it seems to be an out-of-place artifact. This thing measured 67 meters by 67 meters by 47 meters. It also weighs 785 grams, so that's quite a bit. It was found in ancient coal deposits in Wolfseg, Austria that seem to date back 60 million years ago or something like that. The efficacy of that dating, I don't really know, but we're not going to get into that discussion today. Now, in this little cube, there's a deep groove that almost goes halfway through the thing. It looks like it's an out-of-place artifact, like maybe somebody carved this thing. Scientists even theorize that maybe it was a meteor that came down to Earth and was lodged there, but this was ruled out. In the late 1960s, so almost 100 years after it was originally discovered, people did some testing on it and stuff like that, and they realized that it was probably just some piece of like cast iron mining equipment that was found in the coal deposits. How did it get in the coal deposit? I don't know. It just seems weird to me that this thing would be lost down in a crack, like down in a coal mine, and then later on they would find it and think that it was, I don't know. I don't think that it was just a piece of cast iron, but I'm also a conspiracy theorist. The Disc of Sabu. This is a really cool stone disc that dates back to like 3000 BC in the tomb or resting place of this ancient guy named Sabu. He was literally of the first dynasty, so a long time ago. In 1936, this thing was found by a guy named Walter Emery. This thing is really cool looking, but we really don't know what it was used for, like so many other things on this list. It was made from a fragile form of siltstone. It's like 60 centimeters in diameter and 10 centimeters wide. I don't know what it was used for. It's also got a round hole in it, almost like it could be used for a wheel or something like that. One of the first theories was that it was some type of steering wheel because it literally looks like a modern day steering wheel. Here's the thing about this thing. It's so old that we still don't know what it was used for. People think that it might have been a ceremonial bowl or some sort of vase, or just, we don't know. It could have been an actual steering wheel. Maybe it was some form of pulley, like you put a belt around it or something. I don't know. This thing was made even before the Great Pyramids, so this craftsmanship of this thing is pretty crazy because, you know, they were already good at this stuff before then, and this just proves that. Another theory about this thing is that it could have been part of like a centrifugal pump. So think like a water pump, because the ancient Egyptians did use irrigation and stuff like that, so maybe they had something that spun this thing around and it was some sort of impeller or something like that. Or it could have been part of an ancient alien spaceship. But I'll let you decide. The Temple of the Unknown God. The Temple of the Unknown God was an ancient altar to an unknown god in Athens, Greece. It was actually mentioned by the Apostle Paul in the Bible. In the book of Acts chapter 17, Paul goes on a tangent about this altar to an unknown god. Paul spins this altar to this unknown god as an altar to the God, like the Hebrew God. The traditional belief about this altar is that it was to please any unknown god that they might have left out of their worship of their Greek pantheon. Paul uses this against them to say that the unknown God is the Israeli God or the Yahweh. Paul says that this is the true God. This is the God that created the world. This is the God that gives life to the people. This is the God. I actually didn't know anything about this temple to this unknown God. I didn't realize that that was what Acts chapter 17 was referring to, which is kind of bad because I'm a Christian. I'm supposed to have biblical knowledge about that stuff, but here we are. Now I know what he's talking about, and this is just really cool, so hopefully you found it cool too. The Baalbek Stones. The Baalbek Stones are a collection of megalithic stones that were found in ancient Heliopolis, so in modern-day Baalbek, Lebanon. There are 6 of these stones, and the bigger 3 are 3 of the largest stones ever moved by mankind. They're referred to as the trilithon or trilithon, however you say that. Each one of these stones is 62 feet long, 14 feet high, and 12 feet wide. Each of them also weighs between 750 and 800 tons. That's around 1.7 million pounds per stone. These massive things were moved from their quarry to a different spot in the city, which is crazy because how in the world would you move 1.7 million pounds 3 times? There are 3 other stones that still remain in that nearby quarry where these things were probably made and moved from or whatever, however that works. The first one is known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. It's bigger than those others. It weighs 1,000 tons and it's even bigger in their dimensions as well, but the tons are what really matters to me. Now, why it's called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, there's like some ancient wives' tales about this. Like maybe there was a pregnant woman that told the people that she knew how to move this stuff. She would just have to be fed until she gave birth, and then she could do it, which is crazy that they actually fell for that, if that's true. Another folktale about this says that there were ancient genies that were pregnant that were tasked with moving this thing, and they just failed. I don't know how that even works, but whatever. There's also one known as the Stone of the South, which is even bigger. It's like 1,250 tons, which is crazy. Finally, there's one known as the Forgotten Stone, which is, as you could guess, even bigger. It's 1,500 tons. Now, the stones that were moved, that trilithon or whatever you call that, they were moved to the Temple of Jupiter, which is pretty cool because it was a Roman settlement. Baalbek was like a Roman colony. There is no telling how these people move this. Apparently, if you rig up enough pulleys and different systems of rollers and stuff like that to move them, you could move them with like 144 men, but I don't know how that would work. I don't know. These mysteries are getting more mysterious every day. The Lost City of Giants in Ecuador. This is just as it seems. It's a lost city or structure that was found deep within the Amazon that could have belonged to giants. The important part of this discovery is the fact that there is a 260 foot long by 260 foot wide massive structure. This thing is made of cut stone blocks that weigh around 2 tons apiece. There are literally hundreds of these blocks that make up this pyramidal structure. The top of the pyramid seems to be some sort of flat surface that maybe some ancient priest used or something like that. Now, why is it called the Lost City of the Giants, you might ask? Well, the fact of the matter is that these stone blocks are massive, but other than that, there are also massive tools laying around. Like tools that only giants could have used. Well, I guess giants are like 3 or 4 guys a piece, but that's kind of crazy. Nobody really knows what this structure was, but it's been speculated that maybe it was like an ancient tomb or resting place of like an Incan emperor or something. They think it was probably the last Incan emperor who was actually conquered by the Spanish. Imagine that. There is further speculation that says that this thing goes way back further even than the Incan, so like the actual ancient days. You know what I'm saying? But at this point, we really don't know. This was discovered like 12, 13 years ago, and from then on, we just don't really know anything about it. The Laetoli footprint. All right, so in Tanzania, in some volcanic ash are some preserved hominin footprints, so basically pre-humans. There are distinctly 2 sets of footprints of 2 different people or people-like people, I don't know, but anyway, walking through this volcano, this area. These things date back 3.6 million years ago, apparently. These footprints are largely considered to be the earliest evidence that there were like multiple bipedal humans walking around, or human-like species, whatever. There are actually several sets of tracks in the same general area, but they're actually from different time periods because they have different foot shapes and stuff like that. Now, scientific speculation says that the brain of the modern day hominin or human or whatever you want to call it didn't develop until a long time after this time period. So these human-like things, humanoids, whatever you want to call them, were walking on the earth bipedal long before they had their brain to the point where we have them today. This is actually massive in the realms of like evolutionary science. I really think it's just a cool find, so maybe you do too. The Great Riddle of the 7-Headed Figure. All right, so apparently thousands of years ago, whenever all the ancient civilizations were first coming up and flourishing, stuff like that, they all worshipped a similar being. that similar being a 7-headed deity figure. Through the study of carvings and petroglyphs and all that kind of stuff, these scientists have discovered that in both these pantheons, in the Aztec and the Greeks, they both worshipped a 7-headed Hydra figure. Coincidentally, also in like the Old Testament, in the Bible, there's the menorah that is like the 7-headed candle or whatever they call it. And there's also a 7-headed Hydra-like figure in the Indus Valley mythology, the Indian culture mythology stuff. So you've got biblical, you've got Greek, you've got Aztec, you have Indian in the fact that the Hindu also had something like this, which is, you know, Indian kind of crosses over there. But there's more. I mean, it's just really crazy that all this traces back to all these ancient civilizations. There's absolutely no consensus on the matter. Like, we have no idea why each ancient culture had a 7-headed figure that they worshipped, but they did. There's even a Siberian petroglyph that goes back 5,000 years that, you know, they were worshiping this thing. I don't know. It's really weird. Maybe there was an ancient god or something that had 7 heads. Maybe that's how they depicted the ancient Jewish god, who, you know, I would technically believe to be the true god. But anyway, I don't know. Let me know what you think about this, because this one's a little bit mind twisty. The elephant slabs of Flora Vista. All right, so what elephant slabs are basically ancient artifacts that depict elephants that are thought to have originated in like Western Africa. It's really weird that we've discovered some of these things in New Mexico. That's crazy. These elephant slabs in Flora Vista, New Mexico were discovered in 1910 in like a Native American campground or something like that. More like the ruins of where a campground or a home or something like that would have been. There are 2 of these slabs, and there's depictions of elephants, and there's also like hieroglyph type things, type writing, you know, on there. This discovery obviously leads to the question, were there elephants in New Mexico, or did they know about them, and how would they have known about them if they knew about them? Well, they probably didn't. West Africans most likely did not come through South America up through New Mexico in North America, you know. Also, there's no way that Native Americans would have known what an elephant was. It's not like you could take a picture and send it to somebody across the globe at this point in time. The most likely explanation for this is that it is a complete hoax. It's either a hoax, or what was depicted on these elephant slabs was not supposed to be an elephant. It was supposed to be like a bison or something like that was in North America. Now, supposedly, whenever like Spanish explorers first got to Arizona, New Mexico, that area, they actually found a group of black settlers, but who knows what kind of people they actually were. They probably weren't West Africans that migrated there. There's no telling how they got there. This was in like the 1700s, so you can just imagine. The coolest explanation in my mind is that they were actually West Africans that migrated through there somehow, up through South America to New Mexico, settled there and made that their home. Talked about their elephants on their little inscriptions and stuff that they wrote down. That would be awesome, but that's probably not true. It's probably a hoax or misidentified. The Despilio tablet. This is a wooden tablet that was found in northern Greece that supposedly dates back to 5260 BC. Do you know how long ago that was? This is also considered to be the first tablet that we found with writing before the modern day writing system was created. Like, even before proto-writing, this was like proto-writing. It's long been speculated that writing did not exist in history at all until 3 to 4000 BC in Sumeria. But this was there. We have absolutely no idea what this says. We have no idea what it's even trying to depict. It's some sort of like pre-linear A, linear B script, but who knows what it means? Who knows if it actually means anything? They might have just been drawing stuff out and playing with it. Who really knows? There's absolutely no way that we will ever decipher this thing unless we find like another Rosetta Stone or something like that, but that's probably not gonna happen. The mystery of Hexheim. Hexheim or Herxheim was some sort of linear pottery culture that existed in ancient Germany in like 5000 BC. It was actually between like 5300 and 4950 BC, so basically 5000 BC. This culture had some sort of ritual center and mass grave. Now, when this site was found, it immediately stumbled researchers. They looked at all the artifacts that were found. They saw shattered bones, shattered pottery, and just looked like the whole civilization just up and vanished. They started digging deeper, and they found a mass grave of over 500, likely near 1000 people that were massacred here. There were men, women, children, you know, the whole Anakin Skywalker thing. It was a little bit more brutal than that. The bones of these dead people had been shattered purposefully, and some tools were used to like scrape their bones to get to the marrow inside. I don't know what they thought they needed bone marrow for back in 5000 BC, but it's kind of crazy. They may have even scraped the flesh off and eating each other. Who really knows what happened back then, because that was 7,000 years ago. After all these bones were dated back to spanning from 5300 to 4950 BC, nothing was there after that. Like, all these bones were from then or before. It's like they've vanished. This place might have been some sort of ritual center where people from all around that part of Germany and Europe or whatever gathered there, and they had some sort of dark ritual, because obviously it was dark if they were having their meat scraped off their bones and the bone marrow dug down into, but who really knows what happened? It may have been some sort of religious gathering, and then all of a sudden they just stopped practicing that religion for whatever reason. I don't know, but that's probably not the worst thing that's happened in Germany in the last 7,000 years. Just saying. The works of the old men in the Arabian desert. All right, so in the Arabian desert, specifically in Jordan, there are massive stone structures that appear to be man-made and appear to follow the sun. There are literally thousands of these things. Some of them look like kites. Some of them look like bicycle wheels with spokes. Some of them just, I don't know. There's a lot of them. These statues are arranged in clusters, and they generally seem to follow like the winter solstice. So like all the sun patterns and stuff like that. I'm not very smart on that kind of stuff, but let me know what you think about it. Now, here's the thing about these things. They were supposedly created like 8,500 years ago. There is evidence that some of them have been altered since then, but obviously, I mean, it's like a stone structure. It's going to be altered over a period of 8,000 years. There's also evidence in this area of the Arabian desert that once upon a time, it was probably livable. It wasn't just a inhospitable desert. There was probably greenery, trees, stuff like that. There are also some of these things in places like Syria and Saudi Arabia, so it's not just in Jordan. They're pretty much everywhere. Now, why they're called works of the old men, I guess it's because it was so long ago they're calling these people old men. I don't know. The Ket people's origin. All right, so the Ket people were a Unasian-speaking people in Siberia in like the USSR area. These people are an ethnic group of the area, but they're kind of strange because they don't look like anybody else from the area. They speak weird languages compared to everybody else, and it really just baffles scientists everything about these people, at least where they came from. They lived a semi-nomadic type lifestyle, and people actually link them to like the Native Americans from, you know, America. Some people even think that these people came from space, but obviously that's not true. Maybe, hopefully, we don't know. Now, the Ket version of this language is very strange because it literally has linguistic links to the Native Americans. That's wild. How would that even happen? I don't know. People say it might have happened because the Ket people, at least some of them, migrated from Siberia to America. I don't know. How many times can I say I don't know in a single video? I guess we're going to find out. I don't know. To this day, there's still around 1,000 Ket people left in like Russia and Ukraine and that general area, but it's really sad because their language is pretty much dying out. Like, there's only 12 speakers left and they're all old people. That really makes me sad. Let's go to the next one. Liber Lentinius. All right, this is a really weird entry. This is considered a linen book that was written in ancient Etruscan. It's also supposedly the longest Etruscan text ever, and we can't actually translate it all because we don't know the ancient Etruscan language very good. Now, here's where it gets a little bit weird. It was actually used to wrap a mummy in ancient Egypt. All right, so long story short, in the 1800s, some dude in Croatia had a mummy that he bought from, you know, some collector. He was also a collector. Anyway, he separated the wrapping of the mummy from the actual mummy, and he saw what was written on there. He had somebody over to look at something at one point, and they realized that that was not Egyptian hieroglyphs on there, or hieroglyphics, whatever you say. It was Etruscan. Why would there be Etruscan script on an Egyptian mummy? Now, we still don't know exactly what this book says, but for the most part, it's generally believed, because there's like known Etruscan gods and dates and stuff written on it, that it was some sort of religious calendar. Still doesn't answer the question why it was wrapping an Egyptian mummy, though. All right, here's where it comes in. The mummy was actually an ancient Egyptian woman, but the wrapping paper was just wrapping paper. It was most likely the only linen paper, linen wrapping stuff that was around whenever they were wrapping this mummy. They didn't actually want to do this. It just so happened that it was there and they used it. How it got there, I still don't know, but there was most likely some sort of trader or something like that that got it to ancient Egypt, and then they used it. The mysterious stone structure under Lake Michigan. All right, so whoever said America wasn't cool and didn't have a bunch of ancient history is wrong. I don't know if anybody actually said that or not, but Anyway, in America, in Lake Michigan in 2007, scientists used sonar to survey the lake to see if there were any shipwrecks or anything like that. A massive underwater rock formation very similar to Stonehenge was found in Lake Michigan. That's crazy. First of all, there's a big prehistoric boulder with a carving of a mastodon on there, so that's wild. Also, these stones are arranged literally like Stonehenge. It's kind of strange. This structure, if it's real, if it's not just some sort of fake thing that happened and just coincidence, it could date back like 10,000 years ago. Once upon a time, there were humans and mastodons in this general area, I guess, of, North America. So maybe it was real. All my Americans, let me know how proud you are to be on this list. The Astronaut of Cassar. This is a strange stone carving in Cassar, Spain that seemingly represents a modern day astronaut, but it was carved a long time ago. Now, what this thing is it's like a funerary stele or stele. I think it's stele. Anyway, from like ancient Roman times. So it would have been used as like a grave marker type thing, like a tombstone. Most actual historians think that it represents like an ancient Celtiberian warrior or whatever you called them back in those days, like the 1st and 2nd century BC era. It really does look like a human or humanoid figure wearing a big spacesuit and helmet though. Now, obviously because of that, it's been used in fringe theories of ancient technology, of aliens, of everything like that. There's also some sort of undecipherable script written on this thing that maybe it was like ancient Latin or whatever they had in Rome back in those days, but maybe it was something else. Maybe it was an alien script and that's why we can't translate it to this day, but probably not. The triple burial of Dolní Vestovnici. In a village called Dolní Vestovnici in the Czech Republic, there is an ancient village from 26,000 years ago where there's a triple burial, so basically where 3 people were buried. These were 3 teenagers. Now, this is a very weird thing because of exactly how the skeletons were placed. Now, this could be accidental, but let's talk about what it actually looks like. All right, so the guy on the right over here was placed face down. The guy in the middle was on his back like normal, as was the guy on the left, but the guy on the left had his right arm over the pelvic region of the middle guy. It's really weird stuff. This pelvic area where the guy had his arm on the other guy was covered in a red ochre type thing. We don't know what all this meant. I mean, it does go back all the way to the Paleolithic era, so nobody really knows what was going on back then. Now, 2 of these bodies were supposedly men and the other was a female, so you can kind of guess maybe where this was going. Maybe somebody cheated on somebody else and, they buried them and killed them all. I don't know how that would work out, but anyway, that's what I've got for that. Another thing that led me to this conclusion was that the guy on the left that had his arm on the person in the middle, who was supposedly the woman, had something basically shoved up his hind end. There are tons of different interpretations about what might have been going on there because nobody really knows. Like that one that I just gave you was my personal one. Nobody actually knows what was going on. Some people think that the female died during childbirth and the guy on the left was a medicine man and he, I don't know, took his own life, or maybe he was killed because he couldn't help the woman. I don't know what was going on. Nobody does. The mythical king of the Igbo people. All right, so the Igbo people are a large ethnic group in Nigeria and just like North Africa in general that have origins that go back like 6,000 years ago. Supposedly, they can trace their ancestry all the way back to this mythical king that we're talking about, a guy named Eri. Supposedly, this guy was some sort of sky being, so basically a god. He had godlike powers. He had all that kind of stuff. He was kind of like a god king of the Igbo people. Now, everything we know about this god king Eri comes through oral tradition. Oral tradition obviously gets mixed up with myth, so there's no real explanation as to who this guy was, if he actually had powers or whatever, but probably, he probably didn't. So the Igbo people have this mythology, this religious type stuff that says that he was sent, Eri was sent by the ultimate god, which I can't even pronounce his name, but he was sent by them to transform the earth from a watery wasteland to a flourishing paradise. He did this and he founded the Igbo people in the process. There's actually another narrative that people speculate about. Obviously, it's probably none of this stuff is true. Who really knows what's true? But anyway, there's another narrative I want to talk about. This theory says that maybe this guy was a high priest during the time of like Jacob, Joseph, all them. Maybe he was a son of Gad. The theory says that right before the exodus of the Israelites, so, the book of the Bible, Exodus, right before all of that went on, this guy and a group of his followers fled. They ended up in Nigeria and the surrounding areas and started the Igbo people. There are lots of crazy theories like this, but it's really cool to me just how these ancient cultures, these ancient religions, ancient myths, everything like that intertwines. Maybe this is some strange offshoot of Christianity that became what they are today, what the Igbo people are, who they worship. They worship this airy god person. I don't know. Nobody really knows, but let me know if you know something, because I'm telling you right now, you probably know more than I do. What exactly was the disease that killed out the Neanderthals? All right, so if you're anything like me, you've heard of Neanderthals your entire life, but you might not exactly know anything about them. It really is easy to explain who they were, though. They were an ancient group of humans before modern day humans that went extinct like 40,000 years ago, supposedly. These people inhabited the Eurasian continent. Basically, what we think happened was that modern man, kind of like, us, Cro-Magnons, whatever you want to call us, we drove them out, and then they went off to die, basically. For them to go fully extinct, though, some kind of disease would have had to have been going through their ranks and just killing them all off. So what exactly was that disease? Well, this is kind of a complex issue if you want to know the truth about it, but the most likely explanation is that the pathogens that modern humans were resistant to, Neanderthals weren't. As a matter of fact, these new pathogens that were introduced would have killed them off quicker if the Neanderthals weren't interbreeding with modern day humans. When they interbred with modern day humans, they were kind of like given immunity, kind of like if you interbreed species of cattle, which I'm a agriculture nerd, but anyway, all that kind of stuff happened, and they were actually prolonged until 40,000 years ago instead of dying out 100,000 years ago like they probably should have. The human species probably didn't actually try to kill them off. It just kind of happened because of diseases and bad climates and diseases caused by bad climates and stuff like that. This stuff is pretty cool because evolution's not really something that I really study, so it's pretty cool to read about it in this. The ancient Egyptian coin in Australia. All right, so in 1912, an ancient Egyptian coin was unearthed in Queensland, Australia. This is a bronze coin that was minted during the reign of one of the Ptolemies during like the 200 BC era. Somebody found it underground in a rainforest in Australia 2,000 years later. That's wild. The guy that found it was just a farmer guy. He got a little bit of land down there in Australia, was building the fence, stuck a post in the ground, and found the coin sitting there, and he pretty much just put it in a sock drawer for 40 years. He started going through all of his possessions when he was getting older. He was like 70, and he found that, and somebody realized that it was an Egyptian coin. This is awesome, even though bronze coins from ancient Egypt tend to pop up pretty much everywhere in the whole entire world. But anyway, this is cool. This obviously led to theories that said that ancient Egypt might have colonized Australia. Something like that might have been going on. Who really knows? Like so many other out-of-place artifacts, the most likely scenario is that a miner was walking down an aboriginal track. He wasn't actually an aborigine. He wasn't an ancient native to Australia. He was a miner in like the 1900s that was walking around there, dropped the coin, and then like 10, 12 years later, this guy picked it up. That's sadly probably the truth. I think it would be a lot cooler if it was like an ancient Egyptian colony over here in Australia, but that's probably not the case. The mysterious black bones of Set. All right, so if you're unaware, the ancient Egyptians had a god named Set. Once upon a time, around 3,300 years ago in ancient Egypt, a massive sandstorm blew away the sand to reveal a massive set of black bones. These were massive bones that they supposedly link back to their god, Set. Alright, so all that might be complete fiction, but in 1922, a grave in ancient Egypt was uncovered that had lots of very ancient artifacts that dated back like 2 million years ago, as well as a set of black bones. Now, these bones were actually found in a set of tombs for ancient rulers or like the lording class. Now, here's the thing. These bones and these artifacts were wrapped up in linens and obviously transported from their original location to this spot. I really don't know what these things were, but supposedly they transported them over 500 miles, which is crazy, and there were like 2 tons of them, maybe even 3 tons. Now, this place where these bones were found, this little settlement called Kal El Kabir, was actually like a religious area that was dedicated to the worship of the god Set. That's why they're known as the Black Bones of Set, because they're there and that's where he was worshipped. Now, this monstrous god was basically evil. He was the ruler of a black land. He was just basically an evil force in the land. So if our story in the beginning is true and these Egyptians found these black bones 3,300 years ago, they thought they were demonic or evil or something like that, and they transported them to this Kal El Kabir and they set them there because obviously that was his bones. I don't know how that would work out, what they thought about that, but anyway. Now, you remember when I said these things were unearthed like 100 years ago? Well, they basically sat there for like 80 years. Nobody even looked at them. When scientists finally started looking at them, they realized that they're not just like human bones. There are human bones in there, but there are also bones of wildebeest, crocodiles, every kind of like animal that was in that area of ancient Egypt. There's bones of them in there, and they're black. Why are they black? I don't know. Regardless of what they were, 3,300 years ago, when these Egyptians found these bones, they thought they were the bones of their god Set. I guess because they fit the black nature of him being like dark, demonic, stuff like that. These bones were black and hard, and the Egyptians probably thought that they were made of iron because they were so hard. And in the Egyptian religion, the bones of gods were made of iron. So obviously, that's why they thought they were the bones of gods. This is an incredible find. We don't know how these people found these, where these people found these, why they brought them there for sure, but we can speculate on all of it. The mysterious void in Egypt's Great Pyramid. There is a great hidden void at least 100 feet long in Egypt's Great Pyramid in Giza. This space is very similar to the space that makes up the Grand Gallery, which leads to like the throne room or burial room, whatever you call it, in that pyramid. Here's the thing about this. We didn't know it was there. We don't know what purpose it serves. None of that. We actually didn't know about it until 2017, which is crazy because these things have been here for thousands of years. Now, as we know, there are tons of theories about the Great Pyramids, whether they were just burial chambers or if they were something else. Maybe they were something like a great power generator that served ancient Egypt because they were advanced in their technology. They had electricity all the way back then because it kind of replicates like a Tesla coil, the structure of the pyramid and the shape of a Tesla coil. We don't know. That's probably all mumbo jumbo, but still, why is this void there? There's quite literally no way to know because we can't get there. We would have to dig through other parts of the Great Pyramid to get there, and that would damage the structural integrity, stuff like that. Maybe they could send a little drone in, like Rainbow Six, to just send a drone in and find out what's there. I don't know. This void could also be something like a pressure reliever, so it's just completely buried to, help the load-bearing weight of the rest of the pyramid. These ancient Egyptians were brilliant mathematicians, so they would have figured all that out. Eventually, we might actually figure out what this was used for, what the Great Pyramid was used for in general, but today is not that day, so I'm going to go to the next one. The Bakwesi people. These were ancient and semi-mythical people that ruled over areas of like Uganda. Sometimes where the Bakwesi people were is also referred to as the legendary state of Kitara. Now, these people had several different dynasties, and the second one, and the one that's most associated with the Bakwesi name, is called Chwezi, I think. In oral traditions in Africa, they're traditionally known as basically demigod-like people. Supposedly, they created megalithic stone structures, and they had advanced cattle farming. They were just really good at everything they did. There's really little evidence to tell anything about these people because everything that we know about them was like passed down orally, but they were supposedly living in, as late as the 1500s, but they eventually assimilated into the normal people of the area. Now, how these people were considered to be still like legendary, demigods, stuff like that up till 1500 is kind of crazy because Europe was so advanced over there, but I don't know. Everybody does stuff at their own pace. I say that like Europe doesn't have stories of absolutely insane medieval dragons and knights and King Arthur and all that stuff. I'm gonna shut up. I really don't know anything else about these people to tell you though, so there's that. The mystery of the Didanum people. Alright, so traditionally the Didanum people are linked to the Nephilim and the Rephaim peoples, so the biblical giants, which are offspring of humans and angels from the Bible, and then the Rephaim, which are basically great heroes. I can already hear Wendigoon going crazy over the mention of the Nephilim here. Let me break that down just a little bit more for you. The Nephilim are supposedly the kids, the children of the sons of God or the angels that mated on the earth with the daughters of man, so, humans. So they're pretty much demigods. They have massive size, giants. They have powers, stuff like that. Both the Nephilim people and the Rephaim people are kind of mentioned in the Bible, or in biblical circles at least. They're pretty much pseudo-legendary peoples. In other ancient texts from that area, sort of the Levant area, the Didanum people were mentioned by the Akkadians. Nobody's sure exactly who these people were supposed to be, but like the carvings and writings or proto-writings, whatever, of these people say that they were some sort of ancient establishment, civilization, something like that. Nobody truly knows who these people were and why they're linked to the Nephilim and the Rephaim in the first place. These people were supposedly mentioned in the Canaanite epic of Cret that was written in like the Bronze Age or something like that, but their god, which was named El, I think, had something to do with these people somehow. Now, it's been theorized that these people might have been kind of confused with the Amorite people. The Amorite people were a group of people that actually lived, we know for a fact, historically, that they lived in that area, the Levant area, whatever, in like 2000, 3000 BC, in there. The fringe theorists still equate these people with the Nephilim and with the Rephaim, so they said that they were giant people of great stature and great power, but nobody really knows why they were given this depiction. It was just kind of folklore stuff. The 9 unknown men of Emperor Ashoka. Alright, the Emperor Ashoka was also known as Ashoka the Great, and he was the emperor of a Indian type civilization known as the Mauryan Empire during the 300 to 200 BC era. This was a very large empire in that general region. This guy was Buddhist and supposedly spread Buddhism across Asia at the time. So who exactly were the 9 unknown men of Emperor Ashoka? Well, supposedly this guy created a secret society that was based and founded by these 9 men. They were tasked with keeping secret a lot of ancient advanced knowledge. Think about stuff like science and warfare, psychology, sociology, all that kind of stuff. From what I understand, these 9 unknown men each were tasked with a advanced area of study. So one would study warfare, one would study sociology, psychology, the list goes so on and so forth. 9 of these subjects. These people were hiding in plain sight, kind of like you think the Freemasons or something would be. Nobody knew who they were, but people knew that this society actually did exist. I mean, that's why we're talking about it on this iceberg. Here's the thing about the 9 unknown men. This was probably completely fake. Something like this absolutely could have existed, but there is no historical evidence to actually back this up. This was started by fringe theorists that wrote basically historical fiction about it. That, and it was probably inspired by some sort of acid trip or something. Everybody wants to link ancient India and the Indus Valley civilization and everything that was going on over there with ancient technology, ancient aliens, all that kind of stuff, but it probably just didn't happen like that. People will forever be writing stuff like this about ancient civilizations, like maybe there were aliens that helped them build all this stuff. Maybe they were just smart. Maybe they figured all this stuff out on their own and there wasn't such a thing as an ancient secret society to pass down knowledge of gravity and aliens. I mean, just whatever. Despite the fact that this was probably complete nonsense, there was one man in particular who wanted to take over the world, basically, that was very, very interested in this stuff. I'll give you one guess. He was evil and he had a mustache and he was from Germany. There you go. That's gonna do it for the Complete Ancient Mysteries Iceberg Volume 2. I've had an absolute blast recording this video. I know it's taken me a long time to get it out, but here it is. I'm going to have more for you coming up soon. I'm not going to release like 20-minute videos anymore, I don't think. I'm going to go all in. I'm going to make like 1 hour to 90-minute type videos. They just perform better and are better on my sanity. Let me know what you guys think of that idea, or if you think I should just keep posting the shorter videos. But until next time, watch the Complete Ancient Mysteries of the World Iceberg Volume 1 if you haven't seen it already. It's linked on screen right here. Thank you for all the support. Thank you for watching to this point. Hit that subscribe button if you're still here. And now I'll see you in the next one. Peace.